Right, this is going to be another episode of Counterpoints. Now, you know how when you're no, it's just a joke. There's no actual ad for the beginning of this one. But I did start. See, this is the thing. I've trained you all now, Pavlovian style, that when I switch to that, like, you know how, like, that means either A, I was thinking up the beginning of the joke while the other person was talking. I'm giving away all the trade secrets now. Or I've obviously got a straight fire ad read to do, but we haven't got one. So what we're going to do for this one is just get straight into pure CS. Because first of all, technically, and I'm sick of saying this now, right, technically, Maniac, CS goes over. Like,
that's done.
Mate, I don't know what reverse blue balls is, but whatever we've done to like the fans and even ourselves this year with this whole like CS goes over. Like,
I know.
We're in a toxic relationship with media, guys, because like, remember that major that we told everyone was the last was in like May. It's October now. We've only actually just for real stopped bloody doing Counter-Strike, like, because we've been telling them all that. And then also, it's the whole thing of like, in a way, because we did it like that, we were like, right, it's the major, but it's the last one. Well, it's the last Cologne, it's the last prestige event. Then we were like, is it the last LAN? I don't know his game, is it? And then and then finally we had this like pro league, but then also we had the online showdowns. I will say, I do feel like we sort of ended in a sort of underwhelming way. Like, we're going to get into it in a minute. But even though, by the way, on their behalf, the MOUZ run is like a really interesting run with like really unique and out of nowhere. At the same time, it's not really like the most iconic way to end CSGO lands, is it? Like, and your champion is Jim Hart, like, because everyone else in CS history would be like, who? Like, he's only just come along now, and then also even online, like, think about these narratives, Maniac. If I was going to write storylines, you wouldn't have the online last ever CSGO tournament end with like, right, no. And Alicia's Complexity, they just beat Team Liquid, like, okay. And then the other one's like, oh, and then you know, like Nico and GT, yeah, they're not going to the LAN. Like, oh, brilliant. Okay. I mean, I guess I'm sort of happy Cloud9 is, but okay. What happened to G2? So in a way, it's over now, so it's all good. But that's pretty sweet. This is how you know it's not scripted, mate. Because
the goal was not to
better.
Write history. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't want to write history. We just had to go through that obstacle, yes. That last hurdle. You know, ququalify the teams and let's everybody move in. Yes. So that's fine. Like, we're done with this whole like last CSGO. It's over now. We can move it. We can turn a new leaf.
So what we'll do on this one is we will do some talk about EPL and some of the concepts of what happens in Showdown and stuff, but then we'll obviously essentially preview CS2 because the next tournament is like a week and a few days away now. IEM Sydney, if people don't know, and it is in CS2. And by the way, we'll get to it in a minute, but I don't think people have actually let that settle in, Maniac, how insane it is that it's in CS2, because if you follow Twitter right now, there's a reason pro players are melting down on a daily basis right now, because I think some of them have actually realised, mate, like, there isn't enough time to fix all the stuff. Like, it's going to be mega scuffed, isn't it? I know it is.
I told them, Duncan, this is tilting me so much. I made a tweet a few months ago, and not all the pros agree with my tweet, and I basically said, hey, you know what? I would rather have a clean transition. So why don't we wait a little bit more? Why don't we have a more open transition period? And then when CS2 is really ready, we kick into competition. And then people came at me like, no, we need our break. We cannot play over the holidays. This is not possible. Everyone should just transition as quick as possible. And I said, all right. You've made your bed. Now lie in it. That is it. You have the CS2. It's not ready. Spoiler alert. There are still things that are problematic. Yes. Now go to Sydney and play the goddamn game. We'll get to it later, though, because the thing is, essentially, if we run down some of the problems that we're hearing about at the moment, like, I don't know how that could possibly be like a real LAN, mate. Like, it sounds like it's going to be so scuffed and so many excuses and complaints. But let's just rewind. Let's do the end of CSGO, because obviously, like I say, right, here's the thing. I actually expected to some degree, Maniac, like I said, like, sort of like one of the main storyline threads would continue, so it would be one of the following, like, maybe Vitality wins the last LAN. By the way, it would be a cool storyline for the whole Zonic thing, which we maybe get into. Then, obviously, what if G2 wins another LAN? By the way, that would be interesting. Always is, because of the whole Huxley thing, and they're winning everything, but they didn't win the major. Obviously, then you have the fun ones, like ENCE is obviously right there. I mean, turned out now it hasn't worked out, but there's a world where people hoped Heroic would bounce back. Like, these are all the obvious ones that we're all looking for. No one had on their bingo card, Maniac, MOUZ wins EPL Season 18. And I've got to say, just to open the topic, mate, even though I understand, I have heard from a whole bunch of pros that, yes, almost everyone, including the second everyone gets eliminated, was practicing CS2 and is playing CS2 all the time. And everyone who has IEM Sydney is already looking to the rest of the circuit. And, like, essentially, there's no transition period, like we said. Even with that said,
at the end of the day, you know that famous line, as every fucking Vitality fan invoked, of you can only beat who's in front of you. Like, you can't choose for, like, FaZe to get through, so you play them. You can't choose for Monty not to beat Vitality, so you play. You can only beat the teams you play. Even with that said, even with every asterisk in the world, mate, the lineup of teams this squad beat is meant. It's essentially everyone except Vitality, guys. Like, they just, like, this is like what you call in poker, you call this like the murderer's row, where it's like every player around you on the table is like a mega player. Like, there's no, like, easy money. Like, this actual run on paper, I might criticize them as a team, but mate, this is mega legit. Like, look at these. Like, there's no fluke here. Like, they actually had essentially like 5 different teams should have eliminated them on paper. So I have to give them mad props. Like, to actually win in a way, like I said, for their storyline, it's cool as fuck. What did you think of this win?
No, I'm right with you. I think this was one of the most legitimate runs I have seen for an underdog to lift a trophy, in terms of, like, not fluking your way through an easy bracket, not avoiding the challenge or avoiding the favorites. When you think they've beaten FaZe, G2, ENCE, and Na'Vi in a row to lift the trophy and win the grand final 3-0, by the way, in the best of 5, like, there is no one on earth that can contest how legitimate that win was. Now, when it comes to the context, I am aware of it, I acknowledge it, but I don't want to use it as an excuse. The way I see it is, you had a chance to put all your motivation and grab that extra 10% what other teams didn't, and you did. Good for you. Good for you. Get that money. Get that Inter-Grand Slam notch. Put yourself on the championship title. Yeah, of course you had to. I mean, if you look at the tournament and you look at some of the very top dogs behaved, yes, obviously there was something along the line of one foot on CS2, one on CSGO. We can also probably talk about the whole format, like some teams that played the group stage a few weeks back didn't really know how to use their time in between. That's all true, and it has some value to it. But what MOUZ did was fucking beautiful, like really beautiful. And it's got multiple ways you can look at it that are interesting. From Yimpat as a magical, sudden, super reliable anchor, to Torji actually playing well on LAN against top opposition, which I've been a very adamant critic of for a long time. Mega step up. Shuhei now 3 months in the roster, having a beautiful play style where everything is kind of clicking. That's beautiful. And for them, it's also like a huge boost of confidence moving into CS2. Like, can you imagine that's how you close your CSGO chapter? And now you know, hey, this can actually click. This can actually work. We can actually look forward to CS2 together. So this was tremendous from MOUZ. They destroyed everyone on multiple different maps. And if other people want to cry about the context, then I just call it excuses. Like, these are just excuses. Some teams were not ready to fight. MOUZ were.
The thing is, though, I actually do think there was some, like, this is why it sucks if you're like a fan of esports, in the sense of, like, you want it to be like a movie, because what you're always going to feel like if you're a casual fan, I'll tell you right now, is you're always going to think like me or Maui Snake or Pimp are like hating on the underdog when they come up. Like, it seems to you like, right, they come out, they establish themselves, and then we just criticize them and tell you what they're not going to do and how it's overrated or it's a fluke or whatever. But, like, I have to in all context of talking about this MOUZ team, the problem is this, right? Just on a pure statistical level, Maniac, if you look at the stats of their players during this tournament, it cannot hold, mate. Like, 4 of them were a 1.2 rating, put it that way. 4 players. As in, even Exertion, who plays like a mega hard role, and then Jimvat, like you say, is like essentially like a supportive element or something. Even he was a 1.2 rating, mate. Like, that won't hold. Like, I'm not even going out on a limb by saying that, guys. Like, you have to understand, a 1.2 rating is like a good event for fucking Twists or something like that. Like an actual star player level material guy. Like, it's more like this. To me, the key thing is this. What you've always got to do with teams is, bearing in mind, this team's played 2 lands, for example. They played Cologne and they played here. So Cologne, they were shit, really bad. And then now they were like way too good. So first of all, you take an aggregate of the two. You know, you grant them like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. To me, the main thing about MOUZ is this. I think it's actually just like, you need the biggest pieces to stay. So the good news is this. The actual 2 pieces that really impressed me were actually Shuhei and Torzi. Because I already know Frozen's really good. I think Exertion, actually, he was already an obvious addition when they added him to the team. He was good last year. And then the Jimhat guy, I don't really know, to be fair. He definitely overperformed here. Like, I don't believe he can do that again stats-wise. Look, it's more to me, stylistically, can he fit in the team like he did? Because I'll even say, if you think, like, in the finals, the best example of the Jimhat guy being, like, overrated. Like, even as you would see on the POV, his kills, some of the kills were like, how's he getting those two? You know what I mean? Like, you'd see him just get like killed. And by the way, here's the problem. If you ever watch, he's not some guy who has like bonkers aim. It's not like you're watching like, holy shit. Like, he actually looks like a fairly normal player. So when players like that are just shooting people, it's like that might not hold. Like, this is one of the best aimer games in the world. So to me, the key thing is just this. Torji did look way better, like you said. Like, it looked like he actually did almost like fully redeem himself for all those last year of play. Because I know what you mean. Like, online or in like a random group stage game, he would always just tear it up. So all the MOUZ fans used to get super hyped. But like, I could literally have set my clock by him just like disappearing in the playoffs, if you know what I mean. Like, it was just guaranteed that you get him into like a semi-final of a big LAN. You could put any AWP on the other side, he's going to disappear. And he himself, obviously, he's commented about, he understands that he's had those problems. But the angle was, like, Shuhei was his guy before. Well, first of all, that looks like it's actually bona fide now. It looks like it works. Like, I was even thinking this myself the other day. The Imma guy also had his mega performance under Shuhei. Like, he actually just looks like the Shuhei guy. He's got a pretty nice set of results so far, mate. Everyone he's working with is looking awesome. He's bringing like extra performance out of him.
Yeah, and on that note, we actually we talked to a couple of the MOUZ guys in different interviews in Pro League, and something that came out that I thought was interesting was, this whole conversation between Dexter and Shuhei and Torji on AWP. Yes. They actually told us that Shuhei was much more controlling. And this might sound a little bit counterintuitive because you might think...
Yeah, Torji wanted to be sort of micro or something, right?
So, exactly. So intuitively, you might think, but the AWP should have freedom and that's how he's going to perform. But actually, from talking to the MOUZ players, it looks like it's the other way around. Right. He actually needs Shuhei to tell him, listen, this is what you're going to do. This is what I need you to do here in this sequence of play. These are the picks you can go for. And apparently, it's just working better. So maybe here it's a matter of just a fit in terms of play style and structure and the help that's needed, because he definitely delivered. I don't know if he's going to maintain that level. When it comes to Yimpat, I obviously have my doubts as well, because this was, as you said, an incredible, just for like his position on the map, to have these kinds of numbers, it's impact all the way. But one player that I'm very impressed with, and I want to talk about a little bit, Exertion, because if you remember, prior to all these roster changes, he had pretty high ratings in MOUZ. Like, he was one of the players with Frozen you could always rely on. And when they brought in Shuhei and also brought in Yimpat at some point, I feel like he took so much on his shoulders in terms of entry fragging and like basically taking risks. You can look at the numbers. He's got like Art's level of entry fragging attempt. Like, he's literally 30 to 40% of the time he's the one first in. And if you look at Cologne, he was one that suffered one of the biggest drop in performance, because he was just sent to the slaughterhouse round after round after round. And now it feels like either one, he's gotten better at it, or two, their protocols are better. Probably a mix of the two, if you ask me. But he's actually, he'd done much better with the same level of aggression. So if he can actually mature into that role... He's the
X-factor for you.
Oh, holy shit. Like, if he can have that kind of success with that playstyle, that's like a huge, it's literally a bank heist for MOUZ if they can get away with him in that level. So I'm going to keep my eye on it for CS2. What I'm also interested in, Duncan, is how is this MOUZ going to perform in a context where every team is hungry? Not where people are kind of fleeting between CS2 and CSGO. We don't really know what's going to happen. Let's bring goddamn Major or whatever, or Full Final or Cologne or Katowice, where everyone is on 100%. And then we're going to test this. But the first few signs are extremely positive, you have to be honest.
And also, even though it was a much better crowd setup, it still isn't a big Cologne type event. No, you're not in a giant stadium where, the big call out. And like, I don't think people understand, just the walkout to go to the stage for a big stage match is already going to set people on edge and make people who are rookies nervous and thinking about things. That's why I actually love that aspect. This is what's funny, because I'm a purist, I used to think, I don't care, they can play a tournament area. No, I had to learn eventually. I actually want that pressure so that I can see, does the player break? Does he perform? Does it, like, that's why, by the way, the rare times you have the player, like some players is exactly this, where they're like overperforming in those scenarios. It's like, this is fucking cool, dude. Like, if anything, this guy's sort of like, he gets the buff when he's in that setting, whereas normally everyone gets the nerf, even some great players. So no, that angle does mean, like, obviously I have to temper like expectations a bit, but I'm with you. If you think of the players that are good in this team, like essentially what you're saying, like, I agree, is if Torji already, he's the AWP, needs to play at this. So, okay, let's imagine that's plausible. I think actually, if you looked how he played, it is plausible. He might have slightly overperformed, but actually, if you looked how many different games, he looked good in every series pretty much, mate, against every AWP as well. So, I'll give him that. And that whole Shuhei angle, I think, is a cool one. In fact, I'll get to that in a second. I've got a little tangent on that. And then the other part is, Frozen, I already know can play this because he's done it for years and he's just been getting better year on year. So, that one's fine. We're sort of there. Shuhei's a good IGL. The key thing is, like you say, if Exertion can actually frag out, Now you got a super powerful team. Because think about it, right? Those 3 riflers I listed don't even have any overlap in their roles. Like, one's the pure AWPer, one's the sort of lurker, and then one's the aggressive entry. Like, that's actually perfect. Like, we're not even dealing with a scenario where it's like, oh, like, on this map you get do this, and then on the other one I do that. It's like, there's no dispute. Like, it'll just all work. So the one thing I want to bring back up though is when you said that thing about Torji, because here's the funny thing, mate. Is even though to some degree that's almost inarguably obviously a weakness of Torji if he needs someone to sort of help him and tell him what to do, because the problem is, like, as I'm sure fans will know, the absolute best AWPers of all time, they didn't have that. Like, spoiler, there wasn't even coaches and IGLs doing that shit. Like, back in the day, people like cadiaN and cadiaN just took whatever peak they wanted, and then they just mega at the AWPs. If they get the kill, they get the kill. If they don't, they don't. But I think essentially this just shows, in my opinion, how modern Counter-Strike works. Because if you notice, that is also way more the players I'm listing there in the era when people played very loose default Counter-Strike. Oh, yeah. And it was a lot about like individual players. Like, even though individual players have their place now, especially if you are like obviously Simple and Zee, are the exception, you give them the green light anyway. I don't think people realise in the modern day, as an AWPer, it's not that Torji doesn't know how to get AWP kills or how to AWP. Like, I'm sure in an FPL game, he's fine, Maniac. His problem is this. Does he know, like, for example, what's going on the map, that shoe he sees as the IGL? Does he know, for example, what is the entry pack doing as I'm taking an AWP shot here? Does he know when he should do a rotation? Or when should he stay on the site and see if they come and hold at the last second? Or should he actually quick rotate? That's actually the sort of stuff where an IGL or someone who's more cerebral can level your game up and have a massive impact. So that's actually why I'm very hyped for the Shuhei angle there, mate. Because like I say, first of all, he obviously got my attention with that major run at the... Like, if people don't realise, like, he almost got to 3 maps in a pretty major final and even beat Hero. Like, that already tells me there's something there. But then when I see the transformation of this Torji guy, like, the joke is, if people don't know, because they were together in MOUZ NXT all that time ago, this is why the Torji guy got into MOUZ. Because when he used to have this guy way back, he was actually nuts when he was at those We Play Academy lands. He was like the best player, him and Exertion. And then unsurprisingly, they both got the call up, but it looked like the angle was, oh, it's pressure that wrecks this guy, right? Oh, that's his problem. He wasn't ready for the step up. It turns out maybe he just didn't have his guy that was sort of like helping him figure out his game, essentially. So I think that's actually a cool storyline, because as long as the Shuhei guy's there, it's no problem. You can have that Torji. Yeah, you can have a guy tell you what to do if you want. It worked. It looked awesome to me, mate.
I think also one last angle on it is that even though today's Counter-Strike is a bit more structured and optimized than the times that you were mentioning with cadiaN and cadiaN, there is still space for individuals to catch on fire, but you need to help them get there. And I think with Torji, we've already established that he's not going to get there on his own when the game just gets a little bit tight and close and pressure. So why don't you just help him gather a couple of key kills at the beginning of the game, because you've helped him, because you have a couple of paths he can follow, a couple of moves. Because once he gets there, I mean, even in Pro League, I saw him take mega risks. But of course, if you're on 15 kills after 10 rounds, we know how momentum works, we know how confidence works. So as a leader, you try and get people to that point as quick as possible in every game. And if he needs a little bit more micromanaging, fine, just do it. Then once he catches on fire, let him go. You can follow the rhythm. So we'll see if he can maintain that kind of performance. But the question that I have, Duncan, I'm going to throw it over to you. Do you think this MOUZ roster survives whatever craziness is going to happen in the roster shuffle between now and, let's say, the beginning of 2024? Or do you think they're about to get absolutely just completely robbed and pulled apart? Because it is a question that they might have to ask themselves now with all the uncertainty around.
Well, here's the funny thing, actually. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's an interesting point. Because funnily enough, I actually think that they might be in luck. I actually think it might work out for them to keep the roster. And the reason I say that is I think it's actually a bit like what's happened with ENCE, where ENCE actually, because they were so quick with the Nerds lineup to get to the top and get this shot, they've essentially maximized their window. Like, put it this way, if you look at how they play at the moment, Sun Pius one's here, neither here or there. Nerds, I'm almost certain one day will be in like a G2 type team. Like, he just looks too good, and like he's been so good out of the gate on this team. I think one day it's inevitable he will be poached a la Spinks and, like all the classic players. But the difference is, it's not going to be right now. Like, right now, no one's gambling and replacing Nico with Nerds. Well, that wouldn't be the role, but you know what I mean? Like, no one's doing that right now because he's still so young in his career. He's still actually proving it right now. So if you're ENCE, you actually probably can run it through to the next major, I'd imagine, without losing players, because essentially all you had to really defend was you had to just guard Snappy leaving in the last off-season. He didn't, so okay, cool. Like, you could probably run this out. I actually think for similar reasons, MOUZ might actually be able to keep the team together till next year. And the reason I say that is this, if what we've just spent like 10 minutes discussing makes it sound like it's not that these are all just individually like incredible pieces that you can take out like you'd want to with the Spinks or something and just put them into your team. Like, actually, from what I'm saying now, for example, I wouldn't go and, based on what we've just talked about, even if I really like his game, I wouldn't sign Torji on his own. You know what I mean? Like, we just spent 5 minutes explaining why. Similarly, maybe some of the other players, like the exertion guy, like I just said, all his, like, essentially, he's just played in MOUZ his whole career. Like, I don't know what he's going to do in a different squad. Like, I don't know, essentially, what does he need to comfort? Does he like to be proactive? Does he, you know, there's so many X factors. I feel like the only one that I'm scared about, the obvious one, is Frozen. Because he is ready. That's a difference. Like, whereas I said, like, the Nuts example, like, he's still sort of, like, coming up to the boil. It's like, it's not obvious you have to sign him and that he's a slam dunk. The problem is this. Frozen actually is. Now, I will say, I don't go as far as Maui. Maui's does this thing, which fair play. A lot of analysts do this, where what you do is, when you notice someone's potentially becoming a great player, or they're going to be the next great player, you try to get on the train really early so you can say, I was there. Now, here's the thing. I say everyone does it because I've had some pretty good ones myself. I don't know. Simple, Nico, Divisive. I've had some pretty good ones, is the point. You know what? Every now and then I do hit boys. Not everything I say is bollocks. But the point is, if you can ever get in early, some people might know, the other one Maui did this with was your Kindar, famously. Sometimes it looks awesome when you're earliest to do it. The problem I have is this, right? I don't actually personally, I don't have Frozen as like my top 5 rifler yet or whatever. Or maybe he's like 5th if he is, you know. I think he's like improved year on year on year, and I do think now he's ready. Like, put it this way, if FaZe Clan wanted him today, I would tell them that's a fine move to make. You can make it, as long as it's the right role, give him the spot. I don't personally think yet that he's necessarily going to be like Rop's level, because I think Rop's can hit a very high ceiling on his game, but I'll give him the chance that like he's tracking like that. Like, again, maybe in a year, or maybe in a team like FaZe, he could be that sort of a player. So I think that's the main issue for me, is whether he stays. And quite frankly, I'll just throw this out there. This might seem weird to people, but people forget that Rops stayed an extra year in MOUZ. You remember that? Yes, because everyone forgets that he had like a similar timing where he actually had to renegotiate during the online era, like 2020 or whatever. And I remember going to him, and basically he sort of told me, like, I'm just going to stay. I'm not even actually going to test the market. Like, I'm just going to re-sign. At the time, to be fair, this is why I'm bringing this up, because it's the same team, MOUZ. It's also because this is where people don't realise. One of the weird things about being an org is, even if the history of your org, like MOUZ traditionally was more of a medium-sized org, they were more the one that would pay, like, let's say, like a $12,000 or $10,000 salary, right? Which isn't at the levels of, like, back in the day, the VPs and the G2s and the Norths of the world, but it's not as bad as, like, you know, Big or fucking N. So, you know, the teams at the time were more budget. But the difference is, people have to remember, in the modern day, Counter-Strike's like soccer. You don't all get the same salary. So what they would do was, if you were cadiaN or you were Rops, yeah, then you could get like the $28,000 a month. Like, we'll match, or maybe we'll even pay slightly over. That's why there's that story, remember, that Rops says he took like a pay cut to go to FaZe. Right. I'd imagine it was like a 3K pay cut when he says that, by the way. I don't think he took like 20K off. It just means he probably went from like 28 to 25, if you know what I mean. So it's a totally fine pay cut. But my point is, I actually think if you're someone like MOUZ, this could also work out in that sense, which is, one, I get the vibe from Frozen that he actually might be in the vein of Rops, that he might just stay another year, because I actually do think, by the way, people like him, I hate this narrative Maniac, maybe it's more in your world, I do think he believes of that thing, like, but I'm a MOUZ player, you know, this is my team, and you know, I know the guys, and I've got like, we're like family. That's just how your some players think. And then the other angle is, I actually think if they're smart, you just pay him individually a lot, mate. Like, when you renegotiate with him, if I'm them, by the way, I'd explicitly extend his contract now, you know what I mean? I'd come in and go, look, essentially Frozen, here's the thing, it's only me and you in the room, mate. We don't have to like talk about Torji or the other player. Like, what do you need? Do you need 30K a month? Or I can give you it, because here's the difference. If the others, and here's the other thing people don't realise, some of the others might even still be on the MOUZ NXT contract. They might be on like, you know, 7K a month or something. So if I can have Torji and Jim Hart for this much, maybe I can pay you 30K Frozen. So I think I'm essentially, I'm sort of like quietly optimistic they can keep the lineup and maybe get to the next major. Because, by the way, as an aside, I do think it'd be really cool if they could. Like, what do you think, by the way? Are you scared that they'll lose players? Do you think that they'll get picked apart?
Well, I will say that relating to your explanation about Robs, I maybe underestimated the finances they could have behind them. Like, maybe I see them more limited than.
I don't know now. To be fair, now it's also everyone's in the esports winter, so maybe there isn't now. Who knows? But just they have set a precedent that they've occasionally been able to do it.
So if they have the ability to financially not make it too hurtful for people to stay, I think that's already one very important point.
Because you know what I mean? Like, even though fans will think everyone would do the flames and jump straight to a vitality, you know this. There's some players that don't. Like, some players sort of have a mentality. I mean, you can even just say it's a comfort mentality. Maybe they don't want to go and be the guy on the hot seat in FaZe. Maybe it's better to be like the king of MOUZ, if you know what I mean.
Well, the only aspect that I really consider is the player's trust in his own project and team, right? I think for me, that's number one. So if you're Frozen, and if you are now, let's just pretend that MOUZ has been a catastrophe for 6 months, and there is no light at the end of that tunnel, and it just feels like they're getting bombed out of every whatever group stage or maximum quarterfinal, then I think at some point, if you're a competitor, you just say, screw it. I'm just gonna look around. I'm gonna look around, just sniff the field a little bit, see what's up. Maybe someone is interested in me. That is a different scenario now. Like there's straight up peaking in terms of performance and confidence. So this might just be like a protective sort of force field around them. But I don't think this is going to last for too long. So I think you're on the money when you say if you're MOUZ now, maybe try and extend that contract because you have him at a moment where his trust in this project is probably very, very high. And as long as he has that, I don't think there's any reason to take a risk because we also have to realize, maybe not at name value, but with the current ecosystem of Counter-Strike, I don't think there are that many other teams that would be an immediate direct upgrade.
There's another good point. It's also the other ENCE scenario, which is you have to actually be joining a team that's definitely better than ENCE, otherwise what's the point in doing it? You know, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly. So they got that going for them, which I believe might protect them until very likely the major cycle. And then once Copenhagen is out the window in March, I think we might have to rethink where they're going. But for now, I think they're going to be fine. I will say I believe they will be tested. I think probably a few offers might come their way, either for Snappy or for Frozen.
For Shuhei.
Personally, I mean, Shuhei has a leader as well. Like there's basically three to four actually, but let's say 3 solid people that could be poached here and there.
Oh wait, you meant to say Torji. You said Snappy. I'm pretty sure you meant Torji.
Right. I meant Shuhei actually.
Oh right, no, okay, there you go.
The leader.
It's all good. It's all good.
So the leader, definitely in the crosshairs. Frozen as a star as well.
Of course.
Surely there are people out there interested in these.
Because the other angle as well for me is this. Look, I get that now he has just one pro link, to be fair, so that does raise his stock. The thing to me is this, though, Maniac. I feel like you're slightly safer on the Shuhei one, because to me it's like, how did he not already end up in a team? Like, people could have had this guy after the major, remember? Like, to me, that was a sign from the G2s of the world. Like essentially, we're not quite ready yet. So it's like, here's the analogy, right? Basically, Shuhei going to the final of the major, Maniac, was like the end of the Phantom Menace, right? He's like Anakin Skywalker, and then all the top teams, they're like Palpatine, and then they just essentially go like, oh, young Skywalker, we will follow your career with much. But what they're basically saying is prove it, which, by the way, he might now have done, but like, essentially, because by the way, I don't blame him on that one. I actually did say myself, even though, like, look, I'm a like sort of a low-key, I wouldn't say a Huxley hater, I'd say a Huxley skeptic. How about that? I'm a healthy skeptic of Huxley. When he wins, I'll give him his credit. But essentially, if I was G2, I did think that was a bit of a gamble. Like, I don't mind if they bring in Snappy, mate. That's one thing, Maniac. But the idea they were going to sign Shuhei, I think that's the problem with that one. I think not only was it a gamble, but it actually, I think they were scared off by thinking what happened when they had Alexi B, who was a more established player. Like, I think for IGL, teams don't realize. I don't think there's that many squads that are going to gamble on IGL. Like, that's not a role you really want to bring in the guy with. It's like, essentially, we might just throw 6 months away and then we have to reset all over again and buy a new guy. So in that sense, I actually feel like the Shuhei one, that's why I say I think the window's there, because I was worried he would just get signed from Gamer Legion immediately and then he wouldn't even ever get a chance. So in some ways, by the way, I also think it's basically the perfect project. Not only does he have the history with the players, but as we've now seen, and this is what we can transition to talking about, dude, because of this run, and I look how they did it, and I look how the players fit all their roles and the different mix they have, dude, you know what's mad? This is where, like I said earlier, even though I tempered all my expectations in some areas, like individual players, I actually think when I saw this run, this reminds me of events coming up. This looks legit. Like, I even looked, dude, at the maps they were winning on. They were doing all their work on Mirage, Inferno, Nuke. Like, those are just real maps, guys. Like, that's not even, like, they're not like some team, like, you know, these stories. Like, dude, how many teams now have we had to see? Like, fucking 9 and MIB. It's like, oh, they're like, just really gods on Oni Vertigo. It's like, they're not doing that shit. It's not like, you know, it's like this is like the team that secretly figured out Ancient and no one else knows how to play it, man. They're just beating everyone on everyone's map picks. Like, those 3 maps I've just listed, you'll win a lot of fucking best of 3s if you can win on those 3. Like, that's the meat and potatoes of Counter-Strike. So that's a really positive sign. Then, like you said earlier about the idea of if you were someone like Frozen and you leave the team, as well as money, you want to go to a better team, right? Dude, if I'm being very cynical and I just look at the top 10 right now, because bear in mind, obviously that finals run's boosted Na'Vi, who I don't believe is as good as MOUZ, by the way, right? If I look at these teams, Maniac, the only teams I can say for certain are better is like what? Vitality G2 ENCE?
Yeah,
I would probably stop after those 3, mate. Like right now, I can't say FaZe is better. Not only directly can they lose to them, but like I actually think if you look how they play, they're not as good right now. If I go down Heroic, spoiler, we're going to get into this. We don't even know what they're going to be like. They're falling apart. Astralis is like sort of a bit of like, I thought they were a bit of a fluke run at Cologne. You go down the list, mate, after that, you get into teams like Monty. I think people forget, like, there's a lot of teams haven't worked out yet with the roster moves. So if I look at the team right now, why aren't they like the fourth best team, mate? I think they probably are. I think that's actually a fair ranking. Like, if in the next tournament, like, I would say that's a plausible thing that could make the semis of the next tournament.
Well, the only question to that, because I think on one hand, when it comes to the gameplay and the structure, I'm a firm believer of what they did in Pro League. Like, none of the Counter-Strike they were playing, to me, felt either too gambly or too risky or one-sided. I think this was an actually very complete and well-furbished Counter-Strike they played, from map control and individual decision-making to very good strategies and quickly executed. In that vein, I think the Snappy to Shuhei comparison is super valid in how he was calling. I saw him at some point having like very like fast pam 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 type call situation on the T side, and then I saw them slow down as well when they needed to. So this to me is something that you can replicate event to event to event. If you have that vein, it's fine. The question is, Duncan, are some of these individual performances just one-off? Because if they are, then it changes the whole narrative.
It's going to be harder for
we
sure.
Cannot tell right now. We cannot say. We have to wait. If they maintain, let's just say 85% of that individual performance, then there is no reason for MOUZ players to look somewhere else. Unless one of the teams you've mentioned suddenly comes to the door and say, G2 says, hey, listen, Shuhei, do you want to be the leader in one of the most notorious org in the history of Counter-Strike and play with Nico, the best rifles in the goddamn universe? Then that's a different topic.
Yes.
But other than that, I don't think they have anything to envy to any other team. And to mention as well, knowing the potential shitstorm that might hit Counter-Strike in this whole transition period, if you actually stick to your gun and you work on your team play while everyone else is figuring out where you're going, this is a moment where you can get a huge leap. You can get ahead of everybody. And MOUZ, these teams, they can really cement their position while everyone else is figuring out what's going on. They can just work on their own game. They can figure out Counter-Strike. It's even more so because CS2 is coming out the window. So there's going to be a whole lot of things to learn from, to adapt, to be curious about, to work on your gameplay and all of that. If you don't have to worry about your roster, you just worry about your gameplay. And I think this could be a huge advantage for them.
Yeah, you could actually argue, by the way, like, as you're saying, because now CSGO's ended, but they've been together like a short time and they're getting the lineup going, and they even have past history. Like, if you think of the teams that are going to make moves, like there's a rumor Vitality might make a move. We know Heroic's making a move, Stralis making, like, no one knows in CS2 how those moves will work out. Whereas I'm with you, like, they've already got a core. Like, that's why the actual teams like this team, G2, and that's why in CS2, spoiler, I'm just going to expect these teams already be the best still. Like, I don't really see a reason yet why they would be bad in the new game, even if the game's different. So we'll get to some of the actual Sydney stuff later, though. One thing I would say is this. The only concern I have for the MOUZ squad beyond this is it's the thing I said earlier. Even though it'll sound like a broken record, it's just the whole thing of it wasn't a Cologne. It wasn't a giant stadium event. Like, the other thing is, it's like I have to just see them do it in that setting. If I see them do it in that setting, then I actually do what I've done with them. So I'll bump you up another level and you get to really play with the big boys and be like the actual favourite. For now, for me, they're like dark horse contender. That's where the status I'm putting them. They're not actually true contender for the title, even though it's going to sound counterintuitive to a fan. Like, but they just won the Vlad. Like, yeah, but listen to what we're saying. Like, some of the players probably overperformed. It wasn't as high pressure. It was the end of CSGO. Like, there's a million excuses you could. That's the other thing to say as well. This is what's great about competition in Counter-Strike. This isn't League of Legends where you have to wait like 2 months, then start a split, and it's like the whole thing. You can prove at IEM Sydney straight out the gate, if you go to like the finals or a big power run, already you're going to prove you're legit. Like, we don't have to keep speculating. We don't have to keep wondering. We can already see that you're actually really good, because right now, like I say, this would be one of the teams you should actually expect to hit the ground running in CS2 and do something at IEM Sydney. Why wouldn't they?
And I don't think it's disparaging or underestimating them. I think, if anything, it's to be fair towards a team, to put context in the result. Like, they had this incredible run in CSGO at a very specific, unique transitional time in a studio setup, and at the very end towards about 100 to 150 people. I'm not taking anything away from what they've done. The merit of it is tremendous. There's no doubt about it. But if we now just jump to they're definitely title contenders. They're one of the 3 best teams in the world. Well, we're basically robbing them from the right to prove to themselves and to the community that they can do it in different stages, in actual whole events with thousands of people watching them. And that's the next step. Like, there's a pyramid of rewards in Counter-Strike you can earn. And they've done a solid step. Good. I didn't even think they could. So they've proved me wrong. But now I'll get on to the next step. We'll wait. We'll be patient. It's fine.
Yes. And I'll even just throw this out there. The reason why it's not even a diss to say that they've just only done it in this smaller studio setting like we're saying is, we're not making it sound like that means it's easy and anyone could do it. Like, spoiler, Monty had an awesome tournament. They didn't make the finals. Movistar Riders was upsetting everyone. They didn't make the you know what I mean? Like, you still had to actually win the games. Yes. Like, even if it's easier or not the same challenge, beating teams like G2, like we said, the lineup, that's still incredibly hard. Like, that feat alone is epic. Like, fair play to them. They deserve all their credit that they did earn from those results. Right, what I thought we could briefly do, because there's loads of fun roster moves we're going to speculate about and do all the ins and outs and what happens if it could, but I thought one thing we should address is this, and it's something I've noticed, right, in general, Mania, I get this vibe that people have this. It's the same sense that people often had with Valve in CSGO. A lot of industry people are actually scared to criticize Valve. A lot of players are saying, like, the game's shit or whatever. But I think a lot of industry people are scared because they sort of worry. For some of it's almost like it's weird because it's actually like Riot Games. It's like, it's not Valve. But they almost worry that like Valve will be sort of like upset that you criticize them, if you know what I mean. And be like that, and sort of like, like some scorned girlfriend, sort of like give us the cold shoulder and ignore us and like, yeah, okay then. And like, they're almost acting like that. So I've never had the problem criticizing. So my problem with this, right, if I look right now at the current state of CS2, the game that's in beta, and then I look at that's actually the game now, and then I also look at the complaints across the whole spectrum of people. So people who like movement things or hitboxes or the tick thing or all the everything that people are complaining about. IEM Sydney is too close. Like, it just is inconceivable that all these things people are complaining about will be fixed, squared away, and that everyone will know how they work by the time CS2 comes. Because if people don't know, IEM Sydney is CS2, we're told, and it is basically like a week away at this point in time. So the problem is, as far as I can tell, mate, I'm prepared for this already. I think this is going to be essentially the most complained about LAN ever, mate. I think pro players are going to complain all the time. I think, unfortunately, based on some of the things I've seen about like the spray and the movement and the stuff, I also really do worry about like the actual essential, like how good the matches are. I worry about some things competitively. Like, I'll give you an example. Here's an example of what bums me out about the fact that we're not doing transition, like you say, Maniac. It's just like we've turned off CSGO, we turned on CS2. Think about everyone just saw in this Blast Showdown that fucking sick spray that Axile did. Yeah. That godlike 1.6 style spray. You couldn't do that in CS2, guys. Like, that's not going to... A play like that right now can't happen. Like, that's not going to come out the gate. So already the game's going to some degree, initially take a bit of a hit. Like, the matches aren't going to be probably as good. So the problem I have is this. So like I say, it's one thing if like if this was like we were all getting paid $1 million and we just agreed to tank it, right? Then the games aren't as good, but it's like, okay, it's the first LAN. I'm just really worried essentially that there'll be an incredibly negative atmosphere around the event as these problems happen though. Like, I mean, and by the way, I'm not even throwing in, God forbid, like, a netcode problem or some sort of server issue. Like, I'm not even putting those in. In fact, I was even thinking about this the other day as a random aside. This is another thing I was thinking about that I actually am a bit pissed off at, mate. If you're going to make it so that, like, very early on in everyone having access to the game, you have a big LAN, why not have it, like, in America near where Valve lives or something? You know what I mean? Have, like, a Valve team on standby. So, like, I don't know if maybe yourselves doing this, I don't know. But I would do that. Like, I'd have, like, some, like, coders there. And the idea would be as things present on the ground, maybe you can, like, look into it or maybe you can see the issue. Because, essentially, I'll throw it to you now. I'm just really scared that it's going to be the most scuffed LAN ever. Because when people talk about CSGO, mates, and we all say how bad CSGO is, I don't think they get it. What do you mean the beta? That was before the LANs, guys. Like, the first LANs, like, the game wasn't as good a game. Like, things like the spring and stuff were different, but it wasn't like it was mega bugged all the time. It wasn't like, I mean, I guess you had to ban the Molotovs at one point. That was about the one thing, like, everyone did, like, the gentleman's agreement. There's about that, but in general, I think people are overestimating how bad early CSGO was, like, for the competitive side, though. Like, I'm scared, essentially, that this is like having a LAN in a beta. Like, you're just having a LAN where there's 1 million bugs. What's your sense of it? Am I going too far for you? Are you more in the sense that it'll be like a normal CS tournament? What do you think?
No. I mean, I might be slightly more moderate, but I share most of your concerns. In fact, as I said in the intro of this episode, I was very vocal about willing to have a transition period where we let CS2 gets kind of fine-tuned and fixed, and then once we feel like it's a playable, clean version, we move over to the competitions. The argument that was presented against me was, we want the game to be out as soon as possible so that the major can be as high a quality as possible, and players don't have to use their player break to play, 80 hours a week of the new game. And I understand that. I acknowledge it. That's okay. That's a fair way to look at it. The thing is, the first event would be a collateral damage. And it's just that's it. That's a collateral damage. There's no way around it. I don't really mind too much about the adjustments that can be made to the game, let's say between now and the end of the year, because I expect patches to come through and some slight changes to be made. That's all right to me. My biggest fear is deeper issues, such as like this whole like alias whatever scandal where you can code like crazy aliases to have movement. That to me is scary as hell. First of all, because I don't understand it, so I don't feel like I have a proper sort of grasp on what's happening. So I kind of keep an eye on the Twitter.
When you say the concern there, is the concern there the idea essentially that it's like the old days of online accounts, so everyone will have different configs, different settings and stuff? Is that what you mean?
I feel like it's a race, man. I feel like it's an arms race to whatever little exploit you can use in the code. And that worries me to hell, because this means you need to have a very explicit rule book on what's going to happen. And we all know how it is. Like, whenever a little bit of a gray area, holy shit, I'm expecting some...
Oh, no, the joke is, this is where having ROPS and Monacy is like the most valuable commodity ever. Because they're just like... I know, it's like they're just like discovering the Higgs and boson particle. I know, they're ridiculous.
And I mean, it's fun to an extent, but I don't want the game to be about like who figured out the more aliases or whatever. That's kind of... That bums me out. So I'm not going to I'm not going to rely hugely on the results of IEM Sydney. I think it's going to be a good first test, and it's going to be in the name of a better CS2 that we're going to lose, quote unquote, an event into the legitimacy. And I'm okay with that. If this is the the price that we have to pay, it's one event, might as well. Because spoiler, there was no actual other way to do it.
There wasn't.
You might have waited for IEM Sydney, but then there's CAC in Shanghai that's happening, and then there's fall final that's happening, is global final. At some point, someone was going to take it. And there is also a little bit of hype around, hey...
if you're ESL, by the way, you get the angle that you had the first CS2 line. That's great. That's how you sell it to yourself, of course.
That's great, and I'm sure there's going to be a ton of people tuning in to see how CS2 looks like, and I agree on that. Just for us, for like an outside sort of expert or consultant perspective, I'm going to have to be real careful with what's happening, real careful with whatever conclusions we draw. I just hope that the games are clean. Like, there is no shady shit going on. And all of that is organized and ruled on. That's my only fear. Beyond that, I think is detail. The same way, if we go back now in history at the Q3, Q4 of 2012, we forgot most of these events. We forgot about Valencia. That was the first CSGO event. It's okay. They became a footnote in history, and the game eventually became really interesting. I'm okay with that. CD can be like that. It's fine. Just as long as everything is played cleanly. That's my main concern.
Oh, I know what you mean. Like, put it this way, the joke is, this is why to Valve, actually, if I think from their perspective, I actually know why they've done it. Like you said, they're thinking just of the major. Like, to them, the major is everything. So they're actually doing like this, so that the idea is the first lands literally are a test. This is like a way of like essentially like checking out, it's like error testing. We're just like figuring out all the things that don't work about land CS2. And then the idea is they have so much time before the major that they'll get it all fixed and it'll all be great. So, and I also will say, like you say, if you take the bigger perspective, I think that's actually how people think about CSGO. Like you say, they think of beyond the first major onwards, and the first major was like over a year after the game came out. Like, man, me and you were there. There was all the lands and there was a circuit, but no one really cares. It's why I always have to tell people that, like, when they say that thing, like NIP was in the first 5 finals, I was like, yeah, because there wasn't any majors before. There'd probably be like 8 finals or something if there'd been 3 more. You know, like they were really unbeatable. So the other thing I'll say as well is this: the one concern I do have though is, like, it's not the end of the world that we switch over. Like you say, it's not like this will be remembered forever. It's not the most important tournament ever. But I do have a concern, though, that essentially, right, it's like I said earlier about that thing about I'd have had it at Valve's offices. The other problem as well is, this will sound like a side point, but I do think it's a big deal. It's because it's in Sydney, though, bro. If people don't know, that is the most nightmare flight setup for almost anyone. I mean, the joke is, I think you'd have to live in like China for it not to be. Like every other country, especially all the Europeans, that is like the longest flight you're ever going to take. It's going to be like 30 hours travel time, like 2 planes. By the way, luckily in the modern day, to be fair, most of the pros are in like business class. It's not as bad. But even so, like, it's going to be the nightmare travel time. So here's the problem. That's the one where if you go to Sydney, all that travel time, first of all, you have all this time to think about it, going home and all the things you hate. And then And secondly, if you get knocked out early, you're going to be mega salty at that one. Like, because, you know, it's one thing if we just hop over, like, if I'm in France, Maniac, and I hop over to Germany for Cologne, I could be back home by the fucking next morning if it goes, you know what, I changed my flight, I'm off. Like, that's the other thing that you have in a way made the stakes a bit higher for the complaining. Because we all know pros, by the way, pros fucking love to complain anyway, like about minor things. So if things like the net code and the movement and the spray, these are pretty big deals. Like, there's people who aren't even whiners will complain about that. So I'm just saying, prepare yourself, because this will be the most whined about LAN ever in CS. Just get ready. Because like I say, I can't think of another scenario where there was ever a LAN like this, where essentially it is like we're playing it on a beta, essentially. Like, we're just playing a game that we know is bugged and scoffed. So
yeah, listen, ESWC 2012 was pretty meh. Okay. I think it was the very, very early versions of CSGO. So I remember thinking, what the hell am I playing? But the stakes are different now. The stakes are vastly different now. So if you think about, also it's part of like the Intel Grand Slam as well. Like, you can get a notch on that 1 million race. And I mean, it's the price to pay. You want it as early as possible.
Yes.
Well, this is the burst version.
Now, that reminds me. There was one other thing I was going to say. I forgot why as I was saying it. The other thing I was going to say is this, though. I do actually fundamentally disagree with Valve's perspective if they are taking this macro perspective, because I actually do low-key think that is what Valve thinks, Maniac. From seeing how they operate in Dota, so I have like a little bit of like an A/B testing scenario that people who only follow CSGO don't. In Dota, if people don't know, the only time they cared about the international, every event except for that, were their own events. So after TI, they made the majors, and then they took over the whole circuit, and to some degree they cared. But even then, if you look, they've sort of gone back now, and if anything, they're like dissing themselves, and they're going back to like the international and then other tournaments are run by the people. I get the vibe they really do think of like their tournament, like the big one, is the be all. But all I'll say is the reason why I don't agree with that fundamentally is, luckily we're okay now because we dodged Cologne, so you're not wasting like a prestige event. That's why I'm okay with it at the moment. And also, hopefully, you think with how many months are now, by the time you get to Katowice, it should all be good. The game should be fixed. But if Valve does think that like non-Valve events aren't a big deal, all I'll tell you is this: cadiaN, when he won that Katowice, or Nico, when they won this, these weren't majors, but I'll tell you what, you look at their faces, to them it was like a major, mate. Like, to them, those events, the Cologne Katowices, do mean more to those specific players. That's why I think it's cool, actually. That's why I made that whole thing. If people don't know that the idea that it's like a prestige event, there's like a special term for it. That's not just, you know, a big event or a large or lots of money. It's like, it's almost like it's essentially like a major light, because I actually think those are considered true career accomplishments. And so I hope Valve gets that, like, essentially, it isn't just the majors, it's not just the World Championship. No. We're not only playing for money or for the big event. We're all, like, we actually do treat this like it's our life, guy. Like, this is the circuit, and these events really matter. Like, this is the equivalent of winning, like a fucking the French Open or something to some of these players, you know.
No, I'm with you. I think that the rhythm and the pace of the updates so far leads to believe that it's going to be fixed in time. Like, you know, I feel like they've been pretty quick and responsive to whatever's being found and trying to apply fixes after fixes after fixes. So I have no credible reason to believe that the game is going to be in the same state now in Katowice, for example. I cannot imagine.
Well, that's so far away now.
Counterintuitive to no. I really have to give it to Valve in terms of like how responsive they've been, and they're not waiting 6 months to give you an update. I mean, I know people these days are not exactly patient, and we want everything all the time, all at once. But I do feel like they've exceeded what I believe would be a rhythm of patches and fixing. So if it continues like this, we're gonna be fine, and it will be a month to 2 months of shadow area where we don't really know what to make of the results. And in the grand scheme of things, when you and I, we do a counterpoint 236 in 10 years, we're not going to worry about IEM Sydney and what event and who won it. And if that's what it all be at the end of the book, then it's fine for me. As long as it doesn't get any more proportions, I'm okay with that.
Right, what we'll do now, I've decided, is this. Being as, like, there's almost no point doing an actual preview for IEM Sydney because it is in a game that essentially we've never played an official game of Counter-Strike in, CS2. To me, it would be almost pointless because you'd have, essentially, it's a complete shot in the dark. Like, how am I supposed to predict if, like, BIT is good in CS2 or worse? Like, I don't even have any metrics or sort of, like, reference points to go from. So to me, I thought a way more interesting thing we could do with the rest of the episode is, even though normally I try to stick to the official news, obviously now it's become like a little mini roster mania again, hasn't it? There's all these like swirling rumours about loads of teams, and some of them are gradually coming true. Some of them clearly are happening, and I will say, even though I'll have some content on this soon, some of them are made up. Like, as usual, some people have gone too far and done some really sexy rumours that aren't really happening. But even so, essentially, like the movement angle of the idea that there's a lot going on is true as far as I can tell. There are actually a whole bunch of big name, like Brits, if you go and take the top 20 orgs, a whole bunch are changing players, and there are some big name orgs. Actually, some of them seem like doing enormous pivots, and some of them have happened. So I thought what we could do is we can talk about a couple that have happened, and then we'll just do some fun speculation. So obviously one that has happened, we just don't know yet. The speculation is going to be on the second part of this is HenryG has done one of the biggest moves I've ever seen in Counter-Strike, mate, which is, I'll have to say this right now, if people don't know, cadiaN is leaving HenryG, and no one knows yet where he's going. No one even knows why. They've just said that thing of sort of like, we have different visions of that. We can already, this plane can speculate about that. What does that mean? You know, they have a different vision, and so he's out and he's going. And then the rumor was that like Shush is going to be the IGL instead of him. That's one rumor. But then again, it depends who joins instead. Like if people don't know, because another rumor is that Glaive joins Snip. Some people thought this meant Glaive was joining HenryG because obviously there's a spot for an IGL, right? So no one knows. And also, I think people are forgetting this detail, mate. This is the part that kills me. Is because he was IGL and AWP. Well, remember that's why there's a rumor out. Now does Stown become the AWP? Like. This is actually, like I say, there's two angles to this, Maniac. One is the angle that, like, I'll just tease this. I want to get your take, and then I'll bounce off that. One is, like, if you asked me to predict a move, this would be almost bottom of my list, mate, because normally orgs are incredibly loyal to this type of a player specifically. Like, he is the face of the org, plus the IGL, plus the AWP. Like, and, by the way, I'll just say it right now. 99% of people in the world who have a HenryG jersey have it because of cadiaN. Not, by the way, it's Down, who's a better player, or, you know, like Tessus. It's because of cadiaN. Like, cadiaN is HenryG to me. That's the craziest part. So, one, I could never have conceived this would happen, either side, by the way. And then the other angle to me is, like I say, because of all the roles he was doing, it's not as simple as just replacing with player X. Like, you're going to have to essentially, like, gamble like 2 or 3 different players' future on this move. Like this, I think this has enormous implications. So give me your first thoughts. Like, first of all, was this out of left field for you? Was there any rumors behind the scenes or some sort of vibe? There was unhappiness in the team? What was your sense?
So completely unexpected to see cadiaN take the door. I think this whole HenryG topic is like Russian dolls.
Yes.
Like you can remove them and there's always more to talk about. There's always more topics to come through. The first thing I would say is that I was surprised because this move revealed to me how shattered they were internally with a couple of failures they've had.
Yes.
And this is something I didn't expect. Like I imagined that frustration was building up because they hadn't exactly capitalized on like the strong positions they had and the strong momentums they had. They didn't really capitalize on it. Famously, there are a bunch of games they lose at very high prestige events that they shouldn't have lost, but they were still like a top team. We would still have put them in the 3 to 4 best teams in the world. I think with my eyes closed, I would have put them here. So I probably underestimated how frustrated they were. And this is a crazy example of how if a team, or let me rephrase that, if the seed of doubt starts to root in a team, it will eventually kill you like a disease. And I think this is what's happened in HenryG. Like, I think they started doubting, and by they, I mean the players, and I don't know how many of them, and I don't know to what extent. They started to believe that they wouldn't win the way they were playing Counter-Strike. And that is so insane to think about because, as you mentioned, cadiaN, not only leader, sniper, face of the org, but it felt also was the core of the Counter-Strike they were playing. Like, the philosophy of Counter-Strike they were playing, it felt like it was him, and he was fully in charge. And so they came to the conclusion that this Counter-Strike wouldn't make them win, which is, it's crazy. It's a crazy take to me to imagine. And it's like, the only way I can imagine this happening would be if cadiaN had visions on changes that would need to be done in HenryG. And then
which is what they implied.
Collectively, players fought against that, and
yes.
It came to a Mexican standoff where it's just, listen, like,
I mean, I'll just say this, Maniac, as someone who I would consider myself an expert, so reading between the lines on statements and press, what they had said about that thing of having a different vision, essentially what you're saying is the implication to me as an outsider is he wanted certain players in or out, and then, like you say, either the players or the org disagreed, and so it's him who has to be out. That sounds to me like what the plot, because essentially it's implausible to me that they just specifically didn't want cadiaN and kicked him, you know, like
no.
that. On its face, that doesn't make sense, does it?
And that is relatively crazy because it would mean if you are HenryG and the final choice is to remove cadiaN, it almost implies that there was like a coalition that was against whatever changes he wanted to put through. And that's kind of crazy because, again, it felt like he was such a captain. So maybe there was more than meets the eye on like how the group was behaving behind closed doors after these losses and in the weeks leading up to the last few events. There must have been something going on here if the final conclusion is, well, you know what, screw this guy, screw you, captain, we're going to go a whole different way. So that, to me, that's like the first topic. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And then we can obviously talk about the tactical implications of that, because that is also endless. Like, not only do you have to find a new leader, you have to find a new opper. So do you bring actually someone's like a hobby opper, or do you actually bring a natural? Neither Shush or Stone would be naturals in the roles that they would be taking. Like, we're talking about a top team of Counter-Strike. How crazy is that?
That's the part I find really alarming about the whole move, actually. Like, I can sum it up like this. This is, like, I think this might be the largest single impact move any team could ever do. And by the way, when I say that, I'm including, think about teams that have, like, you know, fucking Nico's left a team and Simple's left a team, like cadiaN, like, the best players ever have left these teams. The reason why I think this is the biggest impact move is, like I say, look at all the roles, and then, like you say, he was the style of player they had. As far as, I mean, the joke is, even though he was mega as an IGL, I did often used to think he does almost put too much on himself. Like, essentially, the scenario for me was like, what does happen when cadiaN's dead and he can't talk? Like, you know, how does someone else take over and call in the round? Like, it seemed like a lot of it was just on his shoulders. But that does mean that essentially you're not only replacing your in-game leader, you're not only replacing your AWPer, you're going to have to find someone who, let's be real, is going to have a different style of play. Like, you're not going, this is the other thing. We're acting like if they bring in like Glaive, he can like call and they can be, they're not going to be the same heroic. Like, even if it's the same 4 players plus someone new, it's going to be a radically different team. And I have to say, this is why it's alarming to me, dude. This is why, at least the way it was messaged makes it sound like it's not cadiaN's choice, right? It doesn't sound like he said, I want to leave, and then he just left, right? It was all messaged as if, like, maybe he's not even that happy about it, and he's just, you know, it's just come to this breaking point, and they've both had to part with. The reason I bring that up is because that's the other reason why if I'm the heroic org, I'm never doing this move, mate. Because if I lose that guy's calling style, look at my players. Like, I'm just going to say this right now. I like all those players in terms of what they brought to this heroic lineup. But if you just put those players individually, if we do it the Diaspora Maniac and I send Yabi to this team and I send do they really get in the HLTV top 20? Maybe one does, you know what I mean? Maybe like Stown does on a team. Maybe Yabi on the right team. Some of them just become nobodies. They go back to being players playing on like the 20th best team in the world or the 15th best team, and they just become a normal player. Remember, a lot of these players are players who are like a 1.04 rating or something. Like, they're not the superstars of the world. So I have to say, I actually think the gamble on everyone's part is enormous for this, mate. Like, there's a world where this goes really badly and they become like the 11th best team. You know,
I do fear when you talk about Diaspora, I feel like it might be happening. Like, this might just be the end point of heroic. Obviously, I'm talking out of my ass here. I have no source.
No, we're just speculating.
We're just speculating. But there is a world in which this is what happens if they cannot put together like a strong lineup that makes sense. That's
why not? Yeah.
The only place where I disagree is that I do think Shush has an incredible value as an anchor, knowing that it is one of the most, let's just say,
yeah, but you got to be on the right team, though, if you know what I mean.
Unrewarding role out there. But if you're a team that's struggling to find like your anchor who is more skilled than the average, who doesn't require any maintenance, doesn't require any freedom, I do think that for what he was given, he was providing to them a whole lot.
I know what you mean. I mean, in this sense, though, Maniac. If he joins OG tomorrow, he's irrelevant. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how awesome a job he does as an anchor on OG. He won't win the tournament, will he? You know what I mean?
If I'm a top team and Heroic
fair enough. Okay.
I would consider. I would be like, hold on a second. Like, how is my anchor doing?
Yeah.
She's out there. And then you have Stone, of course. Like, Stone, very versatile player. Potential to be superstar. I don't think ever really achieved that, but potential to be superstar or at least star player. So yeah, these two would be definitely.
What do you think about that then? The rumor. I mean, this is just a pure rumor. We don't know this one. What do you think about the rumor that he becomes the AWPer? Because obviously he has done the AWPer before. People have seen he's done like secondary AWPer on some maps, but like that's quite shocking to me if that's a real move.
Well, listen, I could be wrong, but history has provided so many examples of people who tried it and burned their wings at it. It's like it's almost Quiquerez at that point, and it's happened with secondary snipers becoming snipers, and it's happened to secondary caller become caller. This is like one of the most dangerous slippery slope of Counter-Strike, I feel like. I know he was very decent as a secondary, and there were a few positions where he would be an actual threat, but the play style is so different when you actually have to play the AWP every single time you can in different positions. This is a whole new game. So I'm not really discussing whether or not he's got the mechanical ability to do so. It would appear he's got it. He's proven it. But mate, you're about to play a different Counter-Strike, and all of the positions that you thought you were comfortable in, you might play them 30 to 40% of your rounds. That's it. The rest of the time, you're going to be where your team needs you. So that in itself, I have huge reservation on whether Stone can maintain the input that he's got. And the other obvious topic of conversation for me is, and I'm going to preface that by saying I don't know him personally, but Shush doesn't strike me as the captain type.
I mean,
you feel like
the joke is
you would rally the troops.
Obviously, it's going to sound like I'm doing it as a pun, but he actually, for real, he is a quiet player as far as I can tell. He actually is one of the more like chilled, laid back sort of figures. So I'm shocked at the idea. Like, here's the thing: this is an example, Maniac, of where like I divide up roles. Like, I could believe that, for example, he might actually have like a tactical mind for the game. Maybe he's like a cerebral thinker. But I agree with you. The difference is not only are we asking you to be the actual leader of the team, but you're also replacing, by the way, one of the most charismatic leaders probably ever in Counter-Strike. Like, you're also filling some pretty big shoes there, mate.
Oh, wait, so I'm going to open like a theoretical box for half a second. If only maybe the very vocal warrior style of cadiaN maybe just wasn't sitting right for a couple of players. There is a world in which they would benefit from like a calmer, like more rational, down-to-earth type people, and maybe they would just feel more comfortable if Shush was just like very quiet. If you remember NIP famously at the time, they were not screamers at all. Like, they were very calm people. Like, Xist as an IGL, you could probably not hear him if you were standing behind them when they were playing. So there is a world in which teams or players might have a preference for that style. But I'm just gonna say, if your issue was crumbling under pressure in very tight moments, then I am yet to believe that Shush will be the guy that will guide you through these very hard games where everyone is tested to the max and then your IGL has to step up and come in with the calls at 14-14. Maybe he can. I have no reason to believe that he cannot. I mean, I have no data. But that is, to me, that's like a huge gamble. Personally, I'm just going to put it out there. Personally, if I was the puppeteer of the whole Counter-Strike, I would just try and shuffle the cards in Danish Counter-Strike, and I'm sure you could have such mega...
You'd get a better 5, wouldn't you? Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, you could have such a mega...
This actually segues into what I was going to bring up, which is the other reason why, I'll just say it flat out. Bear in mind, I haven't seen what's going to happen to the heroic team. I actually think, in my opinion, the only person who benefits from this is potentially cadiaN. Like, maybe cadiaN does go to a team and get even bigger success or show that it was him all along. I actually think heroic is fucked up. If they were the ones who made this choice, Maniac, whether it's the players, whether it was not, I think they've actually made a bad choice, because to me, it's funny because I'm so critical of him as a primary AWPer, as a guy who I think sometimes does make himself the main character and all that jazz. But I'll tell you what, he was a fucking really good IGL though. I thought the way he called the game was very impressive, and especially, by the way, in light of the specific pieces he had. Because these aren't pieces like we're talking about. Like, these aren't like Device and Zipnix and these aren't like established pieces that I already know are world class. Like, they became world class playing for cadiaN. I'll have to find out now without cadiaN how world class are they. Like, let's see. I'll be very interested to find out. So first of all, I think cadiaN was too good. And then also, the other part about this move that I hate goes like this. Notice how the other connected rumours are that his roles just go to established players already in the lineup. That's really disturbing to me, Maniac, because if the real reason he leaves goes like this, you know, maybe I'll give you a random this is pure speculation / throwing it out there. Let's imagine he himself was like, right, I agree that this lineup's not working and we need to make a change. So I'll pick a random player. So Tesses, I think he needs to be kicked, and I want to recruit. Insert whoever you want. Could be config. Make a ridiculous one if you want. Just pick up a config. Could be someone just from the tier 2 scene. Maybe he knows some Danish player. Whoever it is that he wants. Right? And let's say either the org or the rest of the players. Maybe like you're saying. Maybe the rest of the players. Maybe they even don't vibe with this person. Like, maybe they're like, no, we don't want that. And in fact, if there has to be a move, it's you who has to go. Right? Here's my problem. I'm okay if then the next sentence goes. But it's okay though because we've got a deal and Blame F and Device are coming. Like, oh right, cool, right. So Blame F takes over as IGL. Device has got the hey, that now, look, it's still a very uncertain roster, but hey, at least there's some, there's some positives there. Like, I could see how this is going to work. If the real move is someone, and this is really disturbing because nobody has been rumored to join this team yet. Nobody. If it's just a player joins instead of cadiaN, and now shushes the IGL and stowns the AWPer, that just sounds bad. That just actually sounds like you're going to be a worse team. That sounds like, when I consider you weren't like a crazy high firepower team anyway, and let's just throw this in as well, you might actually be tanking your best rated player Stown's game by doing this. That sounds like you're just going to become like the 13th best team in Counter-Strike. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to be in the finals. You're going to win these tournaments. Like, so to me, that's why I say it's a terrible move, because even if you disagree, it's like, essentially, here's the analogy, Maniac. You're fucking hitting on fucking 18 in blackjack or something. Like, bro, you had 18. Unless you know there's like a 2 coming out. Why are we doing this? Like, we're on 18. Like, just stay, hold. It's real. We can still win. This could still win. That's the part that kills me as well, by the way. I agree the results were shit the last month and a half or so, but I still wouldn't completely throw the towel in. Like, that lineup, I think they earned, like, a few more months. In fact, this is the other thing I think's insane. I'll just throw this out there as the last point. I'll pass back to you. The other thing that's crazy about me is this. Because we're just transitioning to CS2, isn't this the ultimate time to sort of get back on your feet and give everyone a break and go, the results what... Like I was saying, no one's even going to really count IEM Sydney. It's sort of a chance to relieve some of the pressure. Like, let's figure out the issues. Because I actually think... Bear in mind, he's gone now, dude. This is tragic. What a fucking sad ending to that roster of Heroic. I mean, if you ever go back on a lot of those Hot Take Point Made episodes, I had a lot of predictions like cadiaN will never win a major in Heroic, etc. But I didn't mean as in he'll be gone in a bloody year. I hoped he'd get like 5 years to try it. I hope this lineup would stay together like at least like the 3 or 4 man core for like the Astralis one did, keep it going for like 5 years. In fact, that's the other thing that's tragic about this move, Maniac. This core... like, at a minimum, in my opinion, these are the 3 you keep. cadiaN, Stown, and Shush. If you keep those 3 together, like Device to Pre-Zipnix, you could play together for 10 years, mate. You could run the table on Counter-Strike. Like, look, change the others if you need to. Get a guy from here. But those people, the idea they only play together, 3 years or something of lands, and then it's over. That's fucking brutal. Like, what a shit narrative ending that is.
I know, and this is why I revert back to how I started this topic. Is like, this tells me a lot about the magnitude of the frustration that they probably felt because of these losses. And that is crazy because I feel like from an objective standpoint, or let's just say an external standpoint, there was no cause for such a deep overhaul. Like, sure, there were fine-tuning needed, and it looked like mostly mental, of course, but they were still a very strong team. They just had breaking points. They had breaking points in 2 to 3 events when they lost to teams they shouldn't have lost to. But they were still a very, very well-rounded team with a defined identity and strong players. But it's crazy. It feels like that doubt just turned into a monster that was in a closet and couldn't be handled. And I think it went beyond what was actually the situation. I think they got in their own heads. I think it's just not going to work. It's not going to work. So, you know what? It reeks of... I'm struggling to find the right words, but this is the equivalent of being in a relationship with someone for a long time, and at some point, instead of working on it, you just say, fuck this shit, I'm out. You take your suitcase and you leave. And you obviously had a very strong basis. You could have worked through your issues, whatever, talk about it. No, you just say, fuck it, I'm out. Yes. I'm not going to deal with this. This is to the point of no return. I truly do not feel like they were at the point of no return. I thought there were still a lot of true and good in this team. And this is why I was much more of the advice of, maybe you need to change one player. Maybe, just
not cadiaN, though, I'm sure. I'm sure you're kicking someone else, right? Not cadiaN.
Not cadiaN. You just need to change one player.
Exactly.
And then you create a slightly different dynamic in the team. Maybe you bring in someone with a bit more experience just to help you get over these few games where you obviously are not playing your level of Counter-Strike. That is so obvious to everyone that's watching the team. So I think this is very drastic to just say, screw this, we're going to destroy our whole structure and we're going to bring back something up. Because I agree with you. Well, you say top 30 might be a bit harsher, but I would say they're not making past the top 10. Not if Stown is actually supposed to be the main op and Schuss is supposed to be the main IGL, which again, we're speculating. If this is the case, I don't think they break through the top 10. I think they become one of these gatekeepers who are not going to make it to quarterfinals. They're just going to be a team that's annoying to play against, and that's it. And that is very tragic considering the space they were holding in Counter-Strike. And I also like to have a team that played a slightly different Counter-Strike, a bit more gambly, pacey. That was nice. Yes. So we'll surely learn more about it and the intrications of what happened from the within and all. But this is relatively sad that it went down this way. And funnily enough, you mentioned Blameth and Device. Hell yeah, I would make something up in here.
It would be a fun move. By the way, when you were saying make essentially release all the Danish talent and make a 5-man lineup, that's the problem is right now, those are the players you'd start the lineup with. You'd take some heroic players, you'd take them, and you'd try and make a super team essentially, wouldn't you? It's just the obvious move right now if you want Denmark to win.
I mean, if you're Astralis, I don't know where the finances are at, and I don't know the state of the contract. So again, pure speculation. But if I'm Astralis, I have to consider the whole situation. If you're Astralis right now, Blameth and Device are obviously key pieces. You're never going to let them go, or you're going to make mega money on them.
Yes,
that's fair. You could maybe tentatively argue that Buzz had an uptick, and maybe he's going in the right direction. I would hear the argument, not that I fully share it, but I would hear the argument that he's getting better and he could be better. But honestly, when it comes to Borup and Stair, if I'm in charge, that's the moment. I strike. I just strike on it. I try to make something different right there. Stair has relatively star position roles for my money. He's got freedom. He's got movement. He's got lurks here and there. Borup is a 1-2-1 to Shush. I don't need to paint the picture for you. It's clear as it is.
Oh, that would be an easy one.
There's something to be done here. Holy hell, there would be something to be done. But this is all, of course, in a world of unicorns and theories. Like,
I'm with you. If they have the money, now would be the time for Astralis to pounce. Actually, like this is essentially where you could not only kill Heroic, but get, like as you say, the upgrades. Like,
and you get a mega team.
Yes.
Think for a second. Device, Blamef, then Shush, Stone, and then if you think Buzz still deserves a shot, then it's up to you. I'm not going to argue you down because I don't have enough to say no. He's not cut for it. But like this 5 would already be holy hell. Like you'd have two defensive players who play the roles that aren't like people don't really want to play anywho, and then you'd have. I mean, it would just mean that Stone would have to be a bit more aggressive than he likes to. I think that's the only problem because Blamef is not going to change that. Blamef is pretty much made of whatever he's made of now. That's it. So there would be a couple of changes to be made or thoughts in the structure, but still, holy shit, like that would work on paper.
By the way, the real sad thing is, obviously, the sexy move to discuss is cadiaN. Where does he go? The problem with that is, right now, there is zero possible even way to guess. It's like trying to do the CS2 prediction thing. Because, like, for example, I'll give you an obvious thing that you could speculate about is we all know there's this whole thing with Zonic in the Falcons roster and they're going to have God knows how much money to buy everyone, right? Look, I could see a world where if you're cadiaN, remember, it is Zonic, like, that's the sort of person you might want to play for. Hey, I'll tell you what, if I've been in Heroic and I've been doing all these, like, budget sort of scouting moves to get next players, it'd be nice to have a few million and just go and sign Nico or something like that, you know, and get the player. I could see that being appealing because the problem I have is if it's not that movement, if he's not going to the Falcons, because he had such a unique skill set where, at least as far as we know, he wants to be the AWPer as well as the IGL, I can't even conceive of what team it is, mate. Like, is he really joining Astralis? Because here's the problem with that one, the other way around, Maniac, is like, I thought it was bad enough that they signed Hunden after all the stupid stuff they said publicly. How are you going to sign cadiaN after all the things that have gone down? Look, don't get me wrong. I love WWE. I'd do it. I think it's worth tanking it because it'd be an amazing move, right? But I tell you what, he is essentially public enemy number one to every Astralis fan, like, and the org to some degree. Like, you sort of low-key hate him. Remember, he was the guy only 2 years ago was like, this match is for all the marbles. Like, that's who you're signing. And then the other one is, if it's not that, then who even is there, dude? Like, what, does he go to NIP? You know what I mean? Like, where is there even an opening at the inn, Maniac, for an IGL and AWP simultaneously? Like, well, it's hard to find a spot, right?
That's the key. You got it right there. If his intention is set in stone that he will be the primary AWP and leader, then it's a very short list of teams that could potentially benefit from him, which also wouldn't mean an incredible downgrade for him. Like, off the top of my head, we discussed that at Blast as well. Yeah, Liquid could be a team that would benefit from both having an IGL and an AWPer, you could argue. But beyond that, I don't even know where he could actually go and change. So if you're cadiaN, right now might be a good moment to rethink what is it that you want to accomplish in the next few years and where you want to go. I mean, players that have dynasty type career also have made changes where you think of Apex, holy hell, went from an entry fragger to be an IGL. So you can transition if you're good enough and if you have the will. And he's not that old. He's like, 28? So he's got like definitely years ahead of him. Maybe now would be the time to say, hey, actually, I might just become a rifle and I'll have a secondary. I can be a secondary snipers depending on the setup that we do. I'm very capable with it. So don't worry. Let's just say whatever. Don't worry, Monesi. Don't worry, Zaiwu. Don't worry, whoever the hell he's playing with. I'll be the secondary. When it's needed, I'll bring it up. You be the sniper and I'll do me. If he does that, then I think the possibilities are much wider than it is right now. But it's obviously up to him. I do think that he has to take that into account. I think he has to take into account what possibilities are for him depending on the roles that he chooses in the future. But yeah, pure speculation. The whole Falcons, I'm just going to be real. I don't know what's going to happen there, but it is, to me, as a fan of Counter-Strike, the least exciting idea to just have this whatever mixed match of players coming from a million different directions in the hope that something is happening. I usually don't buy into that. Unless proof of concept is provided really quickly. I think there are so many ways this can go wrong. I would rather not see go down that road.
Yeah, one thing I'll just say is this. I actually do think, by the way, on paper, I don't know if cadiaN agrees, but I actually think the Liquid move could be very exciting. Like, if you just think off the top of your head, imagine a world where cadiaN is the... Because, by the way, like you say, he could IGL and AWPer in that team. Imagine a world where he comes in... So already, by the way, both those levels, he's more than good enough for Liquid. He's better than OC, and he's a better IGL than Yekindar at the moment. Imagine a world where they have cadiaN, and then they still have Naf, Patsy, and Yekindar. Mate, put whoever you want in as the fifth. We're already cooking with gas on this one. Like, there's a fucking roster right there. Like, those are some really good pieces. Like, think about about if your Kindar doesn't have to be IGL, Naf's obviously already bona fide. Patsy's a solid player, and then I think that could actually be a fucking really good roster. The problem with that one goes like this, Maniac. I'm actually going to do a video on this soon. If you look at the last few years of Team Liquid, aside from the Kindar move, which, by the way, part of that is because there's not that many orgs he can even go to because of the whole fucking thing where he's on VP. Aside from the Kindar move, they're a bit like Heroic. They don't tend to make really big gamble, sexy moves. They've either done, you sign the old-ass washed guy like Fallen Sharks, or you try and get like the up-and-coming person and scout them, you know. So the problem is, I don't really know that I believe Team Liquid will get the deal done, or that they have the same appetite we do for it. But I think on paper, it's a very interesting move. I would like to roll the dice on that one.
It would be the only problem that I have, and I'm kind of diverging into a different topic here, but I do feel like the overlap between Patsy and Yekindar was only manageable if Yekindar was going to be an IGL and change a few of his positions. I feel like if you revert to Yekindar, let's say VP Yekindar, and you give him all the positions he had then, and you kind of let him off the leash and you let him be the player that he wants to be, I feel like there might be a bit too strong of an overlap. And if I was in charge of that project, I would probably discuss with Patsy like his ability to potentially
see if he can do something else,
up a little bit, and like reel it in. Yeah, I think you need to do that. But if he can do that, which I think as a player, he's an interesting player. I have no quarrel with him. But if he can do that, then I would definitely keep him. And yeah, Naf in itself, super valuable. Yeah, cadiaN, Yekindar, Patsy, you just need a fifth. And
look at the skill we're even working with. There's some pretty fucking good players there, yeah.
There would be something to be done. But again, you would have to admit that for cadiaN, it would be a downgrade. From being in Heroic from 3 to 4, it would be a downgrade.
That's why the saddest thing to bring it all the way back, like I said at the beginning, is it's only maybe cadiaN, I think, gets a positive out of this actual result. I actually think for everyone, every single person, I think it's going to be worse. Everyone. Like, I think the org doesn't get it. I think, by the way, the saddest one of all, if I had to predict, even though I actually don't know on this, because I'm actually not sure if this was like a dispute between players or the org or who it was. But I'll tell you right now, if it was the players, I think they will regret this, because the sad thing is, I've known a lot of players like this. Sometimes players do think you can just replace someone and everything else stays the same. Like I say, I think this will be the craziest impact move ever. Like, essentially, Heroic as we know it is dead, and it's a new Heroic. So maybe that new Heroic can end up being good in some other way, but it isn't going to be like the old one was. Like, that's why in some ways people don't get this. Part of me was critical of the idea cadiaN was putting all those roles on his shoulders and trying to make himself the main character. But I did always used to temper it by saying, if he ever pulled it off and actually win the major, I'll have to give him more credit than a normal player. Like, as a result, I really sort of would be like, it was you, mate. You were the guy. Like, because essentially, like, you were sort of gambling on a new way of playing Counter-Strike, that the idea you can be the primary AWPer. And by the way, there's the other thing people always misunderstood about that. He's not just a primary AWPer. He's a real primary AWPer. He's not just when Nitro would AWP an IGL on Liquid, that wasn't true primary AWPing, guys. That was like, find an angle or hold a spot on CT. Like, famously, he just did it on CT side, overpass, etc. Like, that's just because he played fucking long on overpass. Like, it's not really the AWPer. Like, the difference is cadiaN was like truly AWPing and IGLing, and sometimes he was doing both at a really good level. Like, that, not only is there no one else who does that, but there's Jame in theory, if you know what I mean, but he isn't joining. Not only is there almost no one does that, but like, you're going to have to come up, like I say, with a new way of playing Counter-Strike, and I don't know what that is for these players. And I don't think they do, quite frankly. How could they?
No, I agree with you. And I also think something that's underrated, and at times people have used it against him, but his whole attitude of being out there and being the face of Heroic, it was also like a huge way of shielding his players from a whole lot of pressure. And that, I don't think we should underestimate. Like, I know how it is to be in a team where your captain is very outspoken, very out there. You feel like in a bubble. Yes. You feel in a bubble and you feel protected, and he's going to go out there. He's going to go do the interviews. He's going to have the smack talk. He's going to protect you. He's going to take you under his wings. So, yeah, maybe the players at some point decided, well, you know what? We don't, and again, speculation, we don't want to play this Counter-Strike anymore. Like, this idea doesn't work. Let's change it. But I hope they are aware of how they were benefiting from it. Because once that umbrella disappears...
Wasn't it you? I think it was you who actually said this on Twitter, because I agreed with the point. The other thing I thought was underrated about this, about the idea cadiaN leaves as well, mate, is, as you say, because cadiaN made himself the face of the team, everyone used to mock him when they would lose or make it. But actually, he was one of the better players under pressure in this team. I think it was you who said something like that, right? Because if people don't know, people will know Stowns had his issues, and some of the other players, I've seen Tesses just disappear in matches before. Like, some of these players, there's a reason Heroics chalked away a lot of those games. I don't think it was always like cadiaN's fault. Like, I know he became the lightning rod for that, but I actually think in some ways, like you're saying it, he actually allowed some of the others. Like I'll say straight up, if you're Stown, you got hated on over the cheating shit earlier with the Hunden thing. That was rough. But aside from that, I said this on a past episode, you've been given a very, very soft fucking landing in Counter-Strike. You have blown a lot of really high-profile matches that if your name is like Nico or fucking Sip, you're getting scrutinised to the ends of the earth. No one ever even says you should be replaced, fired. Like, you've actually had essentially, cadiaN has tanked a lot of aggro for you to use like the League of Legends or MOBA sort of terminology. He's helped you out a lot on that one. Like, and the problem is, when he's gone, and he's gone now, it's just going to be you. And then here's another thing they're not thinking about, mate. If you're Shush, yeah, you get the blame for the bad calls now. If you're Stown, mate, you already had a lot of pressure, but at least as a rifler, you're sort of just in the mix. Dude, you're the primary AWPer now. If you're the primary AWPer, get ready. That pressure's going up. Now, when you fail, think about what we were just saying about Torshi, who hasn't even got any experience. We were wrecking this guy when he would lose a big semi-final at a Cologne or something like that. That's going to be you. Like, there's the other thing I hope this Heroic org understands. If it was the players who made this decision, if you don't like seeing like the hate on cadiaN, spoil it, it's coming for you now. You're the one it's coming for now. Like, he's gone. Like, that part's gone. Like, it's just you. You're going to get it in the face now, right? Let's spin, because the transition here is obviously, like you opened it earlier, is this zonic move is crazy. Like, this is one of those moves where you wake up and you're like, what? This is the news. Because remember, the news for that one was like, it wasn't even like there was months of rumors. We just woke up and it was like, he's out. And it's definitely happening, and it's all done. And the deal, and then also, obviously, there was also extra details leaked, like maybe Vitality wanted him to take a pay cut. By the way, to be fair, I will add in, everyone is asking for pay cuts in big orgs in all esports games right now. I can tell you, in fact, if people don't know, even though I dummy on them, the reason why Evil Geniuses Valorant team just won the World Championship and has to already take pay cuts is because it's just industry-wide, mate. The problem is, you can imagine some of these deals were signed like before the esports winter, and then now everyone has no money, so they know they're not going to have money for the future years. Or if you want to get a better team, if you're going to sign this player, you need to sell someone or cut everyone's salary. So what? Like, first of all, I had no anticipation of this, because actually all the messaging to me after the major looked awesome. It looked like Zonic's going to be there like 5 years, and if anything, he's going to cycle people in and out, and so this is out of nowhere for me. What are your thoughts? Because you've hinted there, like on the Falcons angle, you may be not a fan of this idea of sort of essentially it's like some rich guys coming along, just go and start buying the pieces I want, right?
Yeah, I struggle to piece that one together. I have to be real. I think I want to start the conversation by acknowledging that in the real world, money does count. And maybe we don't like to think of it. Maybe it's not a very romantic aspect, and we would all like to think that all the players have greater aspirations and all of the coaches are just in it for the love of the game. Of course they have that. But money does play a role. And now, if there is truly an incredible difference in the conditions that he was offered in the next few years, and who am I to tell him he shouldn't make that deal? Like, who am I to tell him, no, Zonic, for the love of Counter-Strike, you should refuse this offer because you're a purist? Like, hell no, that's just stupid. So I'm not aware of the details and the conditions of the deal that are happening. But as you rightfully mentioned, everyone is trying to cut cost here and there. Everyone is trying to tighten the belt just a little bit. So if he got offered a way out in a very comfortable setup, then good for you. You know what? You want to put your family in a nice place, whatever. You want to secure their future. He's got kids as well. Hey, these are all considerations that are valid. What annoyed me a little bit was the PR messaging about it makes sense in the future. We're going to have something great going on here. That is the only thing that annoyed me, which I understand to an extent. I know how you got to play the rules of the PR and all, but realistically, you had a core of at the very least 3, if not 4 players that are here to stay in Counter-Strike. Young superstar players. Even Magisk, who's at the corner, 25-year-old, still had at the very minimum 5 years ahead of him where he could be an absolute beast, which he is right now. So if you admit the possibility that Apex would not play Counter-Strike for 10 more years and he might be eventually on the way out, possible, I don't think even that's the case, but possible, you still had an incredible core of players. You could write a legacy. You have the best team in the world by the results over the year. You're moving into a new version of the Counter-Strike. You have the best player in the world. You have a strong cast. You have young players like Flames and Spinks, who are obviously not finished product. They could be even better than what they are now. Don't tell me you changed because the project makes more sense. I don't take it.
Yes.
That's my only problem that I have. I'm not here to judge whether he followed other priorities. Everyone is entitled to live their life.
Just the reasoning given, basically.
That to me is the only thing. You could even have a strong team put together, but don't tell me there's a guarantee that this is going to be better than what you have now.
Yes. No, I'm with you. The messaging definitely is some bollocks on both sides. That's the worst part on both sides. Because first of all, like you say, if you're Zonic, like, mate, even though you might be the greatest coach ever, I'm just going to say this. Until this Vitality lineup got it together now, forget, like, even the Pro League win last year with Spinks, no one really got that hyped off. Until you got this Rio into the major win now, and then now you also showed us Flames at Emega, no one actually was going to give you full marks for this Vitality project. It actually would have been Zonic's graveyard if he didn't ever win the major and all that stuff. Like, people would have said he failed and didn't do it. Now that you've done it, right, you're actually at your absolute peak value in theory. So I get why if you're Zonic, you might feel like, hey, I'm on top of the world. But, like, you should actually have seen from the Vitality project where, as you say, you had the best player in the world. It's still really hard to get a number one team in Counter-Strike. Like, when you have one, you don't fucking let it go. You don't say, oh, well, I'll start again. Because, like, this is an even worse version of what we were talking about with cadiaN. It's like, first of all, there is nowhere else to go. Even if I go to another team, I can only make them as good as Vitality was number one in the world. Like, you're probably not getting a better team. And that, quite frankly, I mean, we can segue into this in a second, you're probably getting a much worse team no matter who you sign. Because that's the other thing. People are thinking, oh, they've got all this money. You notice there's no names signed yet, though, guys. It's all just rumours. And I'll tell you what, right now, I'll talk about this in a second because I'm actually going to tie it to that Cloud9 project HenryG did. I can tell you from behind the scenes, trying to make teams like that, no matter how much money you have, Maniac, is a nightmare. It's really hard because it's like every off-season. Nico's not just going to join when there's no other players. He's going to join if you get player X and player Y he likes. But then player Y isn't joining until Nico joins. And then if he joins, do we have the IGL and the what? And then, by the way, God forbid you even do sign like 3 really good players, but then, you know, you have to skimp on the last one and then that's just an open. Like, there's so many ways this can go badly. So what I'll say first of all is this. On the actual Vitality side, again, we're having to speculate, so I'm going to have to do it like I did with Heroic. Quite frankly, my speculation on the Vitality one, in light of the fact this news leaked out, that sounds like he just wanted it to come out, by the way, leaked out about the salary. My vibe is that it was Vitality's choice. That essentially Vitality sort of were like, here's what we're going to offer you as a renegotiation. And I take it as like, Zonic potentially took that as insulting. Now, there's 2 ways I can go on this. One is on the Vitality side, even though I'm going to conclude that I think they're wrong, I actually think there are cynical reasons as to why they might think they can let Zonic go, Maniac. And it goes like this. One, notice how when they just won this major, they went out of their way to stress that Matt, as like an assistant coach, is very involved. He's involved with the team now. That Extaz even helped them during the major and that they had their sports psych person. Now, the sports psych guy's gone, but you get the point there. They were always stressing the idea. It wasn't like we have Zonic, he's a genius and he wants... Their whole thing was like, we have a whole team and, you know, it's a whole system. So in that scenario, automatically, you're then going to imply that a piece can be taken out of that system. And like, essentially, their way of spinning it, Maniac, would be, unlike what I just said about how if cadiaN leaves the Rock, that's like the end of Heroic. They would probably think it's not the end of Vitality if you let Zonic go. Yeah, maybe, and obviously now the rumour is Extaz just walks back into the lineup, their old guy who used to be the dude they had anyway, and spoiler, already worked with fucking Apex and ZWoo for years. So like, the problem is all that looks a bit too comfortable, so I could see how org people who aren't as in the game as much as me and you, I could see how they would think this will work out. On the Zonic side, I actually think it's madness. Like, I get it, but here's the problem. On a totally personal level, I can get it, Maniac. As a move, I think it's terrible. Like, I actually think essentially he's just gambled what I thought was like a really good chance to like run out his career and be undisputed best of all time. Like, he could have won a couple more majors and just shut all those convos down. Instead, now he's gambled it. But here's the personal reason why I can sort of vibe with it though, Maniac. This is on some level why I left the Flashpoint project. This might be an interesting bit of behind the scenes for people, right? I always said when I was at that project that I had to believe it could one day be the best project. Otherwise, there's no point keeping doing it. Like, I'm not the sort of guy. I don't like Sisyphus shit, Maniac. I don't want to push a fucking boulder up a hill and then have it roll down again. So, like, I want to do it where it's like I'm accomplished something if I do that. So the problem was, in that project, you can imagine, even from the outside, it was very scoffed. A lot of the things I was promised, I was never given. A lot of the things that they said, eventually we'll get, you know, the teams will sign the players, you know, we'll get an organ. It was never happening. So what I remember telling people within the org, like people like Monty was, right, I personally believe as long as I'm here, I can still do my part to a high level. So as long as I'm in a situation that makes sense for me, I'll keep trying. But then essentially what happened, Maniac, was they came to me, and when we were going to like re-sign for the next year in my contract, they did the same thing. They came and they were essentially like, right, we want you to take a small pay cut. And it's not that like I was doing it for the money, but to me, what that signaled was, So that you're just telling me you don't value what I did then.
I get that.
So I just did all that, and you're saying essentially do it again next year, but we'll just pay you less. So in that scenario, it's like I'm already putting on myself everything. The reason why I give this analogy is because I think it's rare that there's a job that actually comparable to coach. Because people don't know, for that job, I've told this story in the past, I essentially did like 3 people's jobs. I was doing creative director, I was doing all this narrative shit as a journalist, and then also I used to literally on the side be like a fucking unofficial GM trying to get players into teams. Like I probably sent like 100 player things of like, this guy can be signed for this, sign this guy. What about this player from your country? And none of them were ever doing it right. So essentially, the reason why I give this analogy is someone like Zonic, I've heard is one of those coaches where he just lives the game, mate. Like when he's coaching a team, these really are those guys. You hear those stories about the football managers where, you know, like they wake up in the morning, they're thinking about the team. They're fucking at a movie and they're really just thinking about, you know, how they're fucking, the winger should play on the, you know. Zonic seems like that sort of guy where he's invested his whole life into the game. He's got a family, if people don't know. In that scenario, if someone comes to you when you think you're doing your absolute best and you're the best in the world and says, take less money, it doesn't even matter if, like, you know, there, but the economics, it'll feel like a personal insult. It'll feel like someone saying to you, I actually don't think you're like that important. And in fact, I essentially think you're worth a bit less than I'm paying you. Like, even if you take into account everything, I can see how someone's ego could get hurt by that. Or it might just make you think then simultaneously if someone comes along and goes, well, look, even though I don't have a team, I'll do the opposite. I'll pay you way more money and I'll give you all these results. Now that gets tempting now suddenly it gets attractive. Whereas to me, I feel like if Vitality had just said, here's the same contract again, sign, I think there's no problem. I think he's still there now when we're just running out Vitality. Because the other thing to spin it to, there's 2 angles on this Maniac. One, what do you actually think of Extaz going back to Vitality? Like, does this change any of the trajectory for Vitality? Do you still have them as number 1 if he joins?
That's a quick spin at the end. I wouldn't imagine Extaz would be a immediate downgrade, but I do think there is a little bit of a probation period with working international rosters and building relationships with Sphinx and Flames. That in itself is one thing. The other thing as well is what does Magisk do in that? Because you have to imagine this used to be a Dupree Magisk Zonic package. We came into Vitality and obviously took a little bit of space in the balance of forces. Now that balance is going to go to hell. Magisk ends up as the only Dane here. Does he envision a future as well with this roster? There could be repercussions to that move that we haven't heard of currently. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But just on the Zonic topic to finish off, I just wanted to say, if this is what happened, and if Vitality really lowballed Zonic into making him think that we don't value you here, we can do it without you, and here is a shitty contract, and please sign it, then yeah, I would take it as an insult, and I would understand he packs his bags and leave. It's just complicated from a PR standpoint to talk about it, communicate on it. How do you communicate on it in a clean way? That's a bit more complicated. I only had a problem with the setting of an idea that something better is around the corner, because I don't think that's the case. Yeah, you just mentioned all of the issues about building a superstar team. I'm right there with you. I think there's levels and levels and levels of complication to actually build a super team, quote unquote. Just look at how long it took FaZe to have a final formula. They had about 20 players in that jersey, and I'm not even exaggerating.
For real, yeah.
It is a fact. So that's the only issue that I have. If Vitality really disrespected Zonic in any way, well, that's on them. Like, that is, because I think there's 2 ways to look at it, right? There is we are in a winter of esports and finances are a little bit dry. So please, Zonic, let's try to find a compromise. We're trying to make it work. This is the best we can do. We really value you. That's solution A. And solution B is, listen, we don't think you're that important, so here is the maximum we can do. And that is a completely different packaging of a similar situation, which is take a pay cut. And I don't know which one that was. If this was a disrespectful one, yeah, then if I'm Zonic and I actually have a very tentative offer coming on the side, yeah, you know what, screw this, I'm out. So I just wanted to add that on top. But when it comes to Extaz, it has a whole lot of shockwaves, I feel like, for the project. Number 1, I think it strengthened Apex's position, because he has a very good relationship with Apex. They've worked together for years. He also has a pretty good vibe with ZywOo. They know each other very well, and I think he might be important. You also have to realize, under talked topic as well, is that we're going to go from CSGO to CSGO, from CSGO to CS2. What if ZywOo sucks at the beginning? What if he hates the game? What if the game doesn't speak to him? How does he handle going from being stratospheric, best player in the world, to actually being pedestrian for a little bit? How does he handle it? Like, what if he doesn't like the game? I think if I'm in charge of the Vitality project, I put someone specifically on that topic to make sure to help him transition, and how can we handle any kind of frustration coming out of it? What are the obstacles you're facing? What are the problems you have? Let's work on that. I think Extaz is very qualified to have that kind of support for ZywOo. But yeah, on the international side of things, he would have to prove to us that he can do something that he hasn't done before. Because if you remember, when he went to G2, that didn't end well. It was a very dry sort of month where he didn't feel like he had a whole lot of impact. He didn't really connect with the players. That didn't go so well. So that would be, he would have to prove to us that he can do that. And in such, there is a possible downgrade for the Vitality project.
Because on the topic of like what happens with Falcons, right? Here's the problem: is like I said earlier, right? That sounds on the surface like a really exciting premise, right? Like imagine that you get one of the best coaches ever, you have an international project, and you basically tell him, you've almost got like a blank check. You're like Man City in football. You just sign whoever you want. Like the jokes I'm making, like he's Pep Guardiola. Like just get whoever you want and we'll just win, right? That sounds awesome until you realise there's so many pitfalls involved in that. Because like I said, I'll actually use the example of the cloud9 HenryG project, because if people don't know, I was behind the scenes incredibly involved with that. Like I was talking to Henry the whole time and I was finding out who was on his list, who he was getting, who he wasn't. And in fact, if people want to know, I don't know if he ever revealed this himself, but I even wrote those little like things he did, those news posts where he announced each player with. If you ever go and look, it's in like very like poetic language of like how I describe like Woxic being a land monster or whatever, you know. It's pretty well done. It's actually one thing in the future I might do, like copyright for people. But basically, I knew actually quite intimately what was going on. And I can tell you that project was a fucking nightmare. And here's why. Even though you had the money, as I said, first of all, there's this insane like spinning plates thing where you can never get the players that you think you can. So for example, like you might want to get Nico, but Nico might only join if like Hunter and Zipnix join. And then you go to Hunter and you go, look, Nico's in if you join, and then Zipnix does. And then he goes, oh, okay, maybe I'm in. And then it's like Zipnix is like, yeah, but I'm not. So it's like, right, you go back. Oh, well, I'm not in then. So now no one's in. But you thought for a minute you had one and then maybe two and then had two. And if I get the third, and then so actually you had nothing. So already you can see what a nightmare it is trying to get him in. And spoiler, the whole time you're doing this, you can imagine every one of those rumors is leaking out. Like that player's telling someone else who tells someone else. And then also, secondly, the worst thing that you have going for you is that everyone knows you have loads of money. It becomes like, there's a famous concept, I don't know if you know, Maniac, that one of the reasons why those Hollywood movies have insane budgets is because when someone who's in like a place where you want to hire a set or like do an action sequence hears that it's a Hollywood movie studio renting it, they like triple the prices is the joke that people say, or like, you know, magically everyone knows to like raise it through because you know they've got the budget for it. So spoiler, same thing. People might know the story. The real reason Essetag got the bag is because Zipnix like was demanding the bag. He was asking for like 40k a month. So in the end, like even though like that didn't happen, it's like they essentially paid like Essetag 35 a month or whatever the fuck. Like it's like essentially people knew, like gouged the fuck out of them when you well already the whole messaging around Falcons has been they've got millions, and that's why so everyone's going to charge top dollar already, which means unfortunately between the two concepts that you have to sort of get a bunch of them at the same time and they're going to cost a lot of money, it just usually means like Cloud9, you're not going to get your dream lineup. And the worst thing is this, right, that I had to learn from that project is the worst thing you can do is aim for the stars and sort of like not quite make it, because here's what happens. If I had to explain very briefly what happened with that roster, you'll realize how unfair that situation was. So remember, the initial 5-man roster that he signed was Alex as IGL, Woxic as Orpa. He had Floppy, if you remember, from the old Cloud9. He had Essetag, he couldn't get Zipnix. And then if you remember, he brought Mezzi, who was playing with like, who was like the same agent as Alex, I think. Now, Mezzi was the gamble, if people remember, who actually, by the way, ironically, was the one that worked out the best. He actually looked pretty good. Now, if you remember, that lineup wasn't that good and it changed pretty quickly. Obviously, like in fucking the... What's his name? Guy came, I can't remember his name now. What was the Zeppa came in, if you remember, instead of Woxic, because they had to kick Woxic, right? Here's the problem. When you look at that roster on paper, it's not even a bad roster. Like, Alex potentially was a world-class IGL. Woxic had actually been quite a dominant LAN AWP the previous year. So I've already got two of Thorin's main pieces set there. Then I have the Mezzi guy ended up working out as a sportive element. Floppy was sort of like your flames in Vitality. You play, you're hoping develops and has some potential. And then Essetag's just a solid fill player. On paper, that roster doesn't sound that bad. That sounds like, hey, if like Woxic and Alex are really good, this actually is a pretty solid team. Maybe we could even be like a dark horse team. The problem you had, though, is any one of those pieces didn't work out. So in this case, the Woxic one didn't work out. Well, immediately you had no firepower then. It was like, that was my main star I signed. So all of a sudden now I am just overpaying Essetag to be a whatever support player on a team that can't do anything. So the problem goes like this. One, you're overpaying when you gamble. So you're not just gambling, you gamble at the highest stakes. And then secondly, The worst thing is like that. Notice that same lineup, Maniac. When I tell you that lineup, Alex, Woxic, imagine at the end the fifth name was Zipnix. Dude, you get even more hype, wouldn't you? Be like, ooh, and he got Zipnix as well. But the problem is, just from not getting, in theory, one of my least important names, it fucked my whole squad. That's also what happens when you make these brand new, totally artificial international teams. Let's imagine, I'll give you an example, right? Let's imagine I did get Magus, because the rumours maybe he gets Magus, right? Let's say I get, you know what, fuck it. Let's say I get Monesi and Nico as well. Already, we'll look at those three. But then imagine the last two have to be like, insert random player from, I don't know, the German sea. You know what? Imagine the other two were just whatever names. All of a sudden, that's not as crazy a roster as it initially seemed like, and we all signed, but then suddenly it's like, who are you? You know, you're like essentially Essetag Mark II, or, you know, already that's not as sick. And then the other thing I'll throw in there as well is one thing I learned from that project and a lot of other projects. It's actually why I have incredible respect and why I started to think Carrigan was the GOAT IGL, is this Na'Vi squad proves this, mate. Trying to make teams from scratch is the hardest thing by definition, because at least if the core exists, I have a sense of how we can play. I have people who have that's the one thing I'll give the heroic guys. At least they have played together before. At least they know how each other plays. Like, if you're really trying to put together, in this case, it'd be in theory, potentially all 5 players might never have played together. You're starting literally with nothing. It doesn't matter how good the players even are. And the nothing you have, I mean, Navi's showing it right now. It could take you months to get going. And even then, when do you ever hit the ceiling? Like we didn't even talk about Navi, but the joke on the Navi one is they still haven't quite hit that ceiling. Like, they've gotten good now, but there's clearly still that 5th gear they can't get into. So I think it's an enormous gamble to start from zero, Maniac. Like, to me,
it is.
It's very different. Even if it's a lesser team, if you just sign like the core and then you add pieces, you know, then you bring this guy and this guy. I think to start from zero, it's the hardest possible thing you can do.
Yeah, and there are 2 more elements to that long list that you've already drawn out. First of all, look at Cloud9 and how they've struggled to make work what was on paper an incredible teams. Like the chemistry. Everyone always says, just having good pieces isn't enough. You have to have chemistry.
He means the current Cloud9, by the way, now, not the one I was talking about, obviously. Yes, the Russian one, yes.
The current Cloud9, exactly. Like, what guarantee of chemistry do you have when you create such an absolute recipe that's coming from all of the places? You have no idea. That's an incredible gamble to actually think that all of these individual great names will work together. Even if you were to manage, which is a big hypothesis, you were to manage to sign big 5 names in their respective roles, you in fact do not have any guarantee that it's going to work. You do not know if they want to play the same Counter-Strike. And if they want to, you don't know if it's actually going to work. In the execution, you don't know how they're going to handle any kind of differential between what they've hoped would happen and what is actually happening. You don't know how that's going to go. Are they a team that can communicate? Can they solve their issues? Can they see eye to eye? You have no idea about it. This is a huge gamble. And the other side of the coin as well, which I wanted to mention as well briefly, there is an attached risk to a unlimited black card, or whatever you called it, like when you have a blank check and you can do whatever you want. There is a dark side to it. How do you know that you are getting players who actually truly believe in what you're doing? And how do you know if they are not just maybe being a little bit the song of the siren, like with the money and just, I mean, we're all human beings, right? This could be life-changing money. This could put me in a safe position. This could help me house my family. This could help me guarantee the future of my kids and all. How do you know that this is not overtaking their belief in what the project is going to put together? And this is completely human. I mean, if tomorrow someone calls me and says, listen, man, we have $60,000 for you. Do you want to coach? Do you think I'm just going to say no immediately and close my phone? I'll be like, wait a minute.
You got to think about it at least, yeah.
What kind of change, what would that mean for my life? Like, where would I be in 2 years? I would, at the very least, consider, why would the players not have the same kind of thought, right? Yes. And so you might end up in a project where everyone individually kind of, okay, that makes sense for me. Let's do this for my life. It makes sense. But it makes it that much harder to think that an actual core is going to come together, like an actual team is going to come together with people that really believe, this is what we're doing now. This is going to work. This project is great. Oh, yeah, that player in that role, I want to play with you. I've always wanted to play with you for so many years. This is going to work. It's so hard to achieve when you have this unlimited funds, which, by the way, is speculative. I don't know what it is.
We don't even know if they do, exactly. Yeah,
maybe it doesn't happen at all. But if you do have an unlimited credit card and you can do whatever you want, it's very complicated to have players who inherently truly believe in what it is you're doing and not are just answering the call of what life could actually be in that world. And that's something that we have to keep in mind too.
Yes. I will say, though, Even though I don't think other people speculated that much on this, even though obviously the sexy angle was initially, the rumor was like it's like Zonic plus Dupree and Magus like reuniting or whatever. The problem with that one is the only angle in which I'm in for that, because the other thing about for me this is like, please don't leave fucking Vitality Magus. As long as they're playing you a decent salary. Again, like I just said about Zonic, you're in the position to win everything, mate. Like, you could be the guy with like 9 majors if you stick with this team. Like, don't do it. But if you do it for money anyway, the only angle I want to see you do it from is finally to finish that narrative angle of, are you becoming the IGL? If you become the IGL, now I'm interested. Because by the way, I did think he actually showed some potential when he was in, Australis. And that was an interesting angle. Like, if I look at him as a player, I even think that'd be a very interesting type of role to swap to IGL from. Like, I think he could probably do it. So at least there'd be that angle. I don't want to spin this though. One other thing I wanted to spin to now is this. You hinted at it earlier, but another massive move is this Cloud9 one. So the problem is there's 2 parts to this. One, technically right now, Cloud9 hasn't changed any players. All they've done is Hobbit is the IGL now, taking the role from Electronic, and apparently that was like for the showdown or whatever, right? But the rumor is that Boomich is actually going to join the team, and when he joins the team, like it'll be instead of Hobbit, presumably, right? So what do you think of this? Like, obviously we've already seen initially what the role swap did, but what do you think of this as a potential move? Because as you alluded to before, I mean, this also shows you how risky super teams are. This is like, in theory, not even like a super international team you've made, and even this hasn't initially worked out. So what do you think about these potential changes?
So on a personal level, I wanted Hobbit to be the IGL from day one. I was very public about it. I was very clear. I thought if you're going to...
You did actually have a tweet, if you don't see people... You had a tweet in like July or something.
I did tweet that I wanted Hobbit to be the IGL at the very beginning, because I knew that this wasn't going to be easy for him from the get-go. But when I consider a team and how a team is working, I always sort of imagine the 5 players, and I'm thinking of, okay, what is this move going... How is this move going to affect player A, B, C, D, E? And what is the end result? And I always thought that Electronic taking a hit individually was a losing gamble. It was the wrong decision, because he is, if I had to make a list of the 5 greatest rifles in the history of CSGO, I might even considering him. He is one of the greatest rifles we've had in the game. So many years at the very top, obviously in the shadow of Simple. I thought it is ludicrous to have him take that hit. Have someone else. So this was step 1. I don't know how quickly Electronic will go back to being an actual beast, because people usually underestimate like how it hurts, like your confidence and having to adapt again to another role. It's not like he can just switch something and then immediately he's going to become the 5th best player in the world. But anywho, for me, this was a mistake to put Electronic in that position. He himself, he fully bought into the project. I even talked to him, like he wanted to do it. It's not someone came to him and said, listen, Electronic, I don't care what you want, you're going to be an IGL. He was buying into it too. I still think now they've sort of swerved in a better direction. The other issue that I have is it does feel like the final lifeline for Hobbit, because of how he was performing before being put in that position. The cut was inevitable. Like, it was inevitable. It was going to happen at some point that he was going to get cut, even though he was in fact taking a big hit in terms of positions and the roles that he had to play. That wasn't going to work if he was having that kind of output. So he's being removed. That's it. There is still another issue. Like, even if you bring in Boomich eventually one day down the line to remove Hobbit, I still think that the success of this team is going to depend on the ability of both Axile and Electronic to perform. Because if you watch them currently right now, you can see they're starting to be a little bit of a musical chair type game, where on some maps they're switching, on some map it's not exactly how it's supposed to be. Electronic is starting to take a couple of roles here and there, and then they're switching up. If they can figure that out, if they can figure out a way to get from Axile what they got during the showdown, which for all the context, online, CSGO, whatever the hell, as a totalitarian statement, if they can get out of Axile what they got here, then they have a formula. Then it's going to work out, because Electronic is going to deliver. I have no doubt on it. If Axile can be put in position and it works out, beautiful. But that's a big if. You still have players who are overlapping in terms of positions and the space they need to have. That needs to work. That needs to work. Now, if you want to have Hobbit as a IGL/sacrifice in positions, or if you want to have Boomich as IGL/sacrifice, I care very little. I think both could work. But I focus on Electronic and I focus on Axile. And if these two are working in the current scheme, that's all right. But we have already established it wasn't working when Electronic was IGLing. So for my money, I'm okay with the move. If it's just a stationary roster and they're going to change again, whatever, it's going to happen. but I'm okay with the move. I think we had already enough tape to conclude that this wasn't going to work with the current structure that they had.
Thing with this one is, I very much echo your sentiments on the electronic move. The key thing to me is just electronic isn't the IGL anymore. That alone activates, it's like we actually said when this team was formed. The problem is the super team aspect isn't quite what it was when you look at the names on paper. Because on paper you do look at, like you say, the 3 first names for the super team are Shiro, Axel, Electronic. If instead Electronic's the IGL, he's not really the super team aspect. In which case we're back to Axel and Shiro. Spoiler, that was already the case in the Farley team. And then, yeah, we've added Perfecto, but it's like I said about the Shush one earlier. Like, at the end of the day, the style of play they play, they're not going to actually win the tournament for you. They just raise the floor of the team, don't they? Like, add up. So the problem is, like, Perfecto even does his job in the team, but you needed something. You needed to figure out the electronic angle. So now this actually makes electronic potentially really dangerous, which again makes it the exciting project we all wanted to see. And the other thing I would say about this is, I've always said, I actually made a video about this years ago, where I actually predicted, now it's a terrible take, it's turned out to be wrong, but I actually think there's a reason why that I'll get to in a second, which is I made a video where I actually explained I actually think FaZe like ruined Counter-Strike in the sense that they made all these other teams think you can go international. Now the reason why I said it sounds like a terrible take is because now they are all international, aren't they? Everyone's gone international, but here's the problem though. Right. The point I made was the reason I think they'd ruined Counter-Strike is because they made people believe when FaZe succeeded, like, oh right, so you just get like all the best international players and then you win. It's like, don't leave out that you have to have cadiaN. Like, you also had like probably the best IGL ever. Andy's amazing at calling like elusive style, win star, but like you're acting like you just take players, put them together, and then, you know, question mark, profit. Like, so essentially the problem with this team was that it's like, oh yeah, if you make it like a Russian/CIS super team, you're doing an awesome job, but you forgot the IGL. Like, that's a pretty important part. And so to me, whenever people make like either super teams of mega talents or international lineups, you better have a good IGL. So that's the other reason why it's not quite like I was totally wrong. Like, spoiler, one of the other teams that are really good at international, but one of them, Snappy, who's also a fucking good IGL, he's made ends work. Even the Shui guy's part of MOUZ, you know what I mean? Like, there's still, it's like the spirit of what I said was right. It's just the actual like reality of what's happened has changed. So on that one, I do think like this is a good move on both parts. Like, one, I'm with you. It's actually quite a cool idea to sort of be like, this is basically Hobbit. Here's your last chance. Like, you can audition via this role. If it works, by the way, here's the upside if you're Hobbit. You don't actually have to be, this might sound counterintuitive, you don't have to be as good in IGL as potentially Electronic. Because Electronic can play better. The difference is, even if he'd been a great IGL, you were struggling as Hobbit. If you can just even be half decent and then he becomes Electronic, like Maniac's saying, with those 3 names, the math firepower is enough, mate. We can get some fucking wins on the board. So one, it's a good last chance to sort of stay in the team because he just seems to be an incredibly well-liked teammate. And then secondly, if that doesn't work out, I've said this before, I don't get too sentimental in that regard. I'm okay with if Hobbit has to be removed. He's had a long career. There was times he was very good. If he's the problem now when he can't do his role and this team can be number 1 in the world, you replace him. Now, with that said, I don't know that like Boomich is top of my list, so that's a gamble in itself. That's why I don't mind like trying it in these stages. But if it doesn't work with Hobbit, you know what? I have to say, I'd be up for trying it with Boomich. Like, I will say, I don't think, again, I still don't believe he was some like tactical mastermind in Na'Vi. I'm sorry, I just don't believe that. But I'll tell you what, people probably did underestimate like some of those things that looked silly, like the space creation, which I think was just him being aggro all the time. However, they made that work. They did make that work in Na'Vi. That did sort of become a dynamic. And in a way, like when you have players like they had all those stud riflers, that is going to be pretty cool if you have a guy that permanently creates space for them, essentially, and then they just clean up the kills. So I could even see that working. Like, I can, like, when I'm thinking of a world where it's people like Shiro and Axel coming in to clean up kills from Boomich and like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. That could work. Like, I'll give that a crack, basically, because I have to say, even though it's just from an online showdown, what we saw in the showdown is why every analyst hyped to you when this move was initially made that this team could be number 1. Like, this really does. If you ever get these players all going in the server, you are going to have some of the craziest, like, raw potential ever seen in Counter-Strike. So it actually kind of has reignited my interest in Cloud9. I was starting to get a bit bombed out, dude. They were kind of, they never sort of hit that 5th gear, to use the analogy from earlier.
Changes was definitely needed.
Now it feels like it's maybe plausible.
And to add one last thing as well about the whole IGL and Hobbit topic as well is that once you make that jump and you become an IGL and you fully buy into it, you also sort of receive like a cloak of protection.
You don't have to frag as well, do you?
Your numbers, exactly.
Yes,
and as long as you are comfortable with the quote unquote shitty roles that you have to do but the system works and your stars are delivering, it's fine. You think the numbers of Snappy, Kerrigan, or even Shuhei to an extent, but he's got a bit higher numbers on the fragging department, but still, like, these numbers are generally in the red, and it's fine. It is not a problem because you have created a system and you are executing roles that allow your other players to perform, and then suddenly the team as a whole is better. Think about Apex, how long it took him. He had moments where he had Pronax's numbers for a while because it was so complicated, and then suddenly he started rising it again as the playstyle was making sense. Why not Hobbit? What can that not be the case for Hobbit? He's got experience. He's definitely a cerebral player. You talk to him all the time. He's already shown to the world that he understands the game and he has got a vision. My only question is, can you handle being thrown to the slaughterhouse in rounds? If you can handle that, if you can maintain a lucid, down-to-earth thinking in situations in which you are living through a personal nightmare in the game, but you still have to be very thought through about what you're calling, that's fine for me. That's a win-win. He takes a hit individually, his numbers dive, but the rest of the squad goes up, the overall average is positive, and that's it. The move makes sense. This is how I can imagine working.